Chapter 54. The Saintess that was once taken away by the Megalosaurus was now riding a magic beast back alone. Of course, this immediately attracted everyone's attention. The soldiers of the mobile city welcomed the Saintess back home with great enthusiasm. Of course, it was also possible that they simply wanted to see what the Saintess and Princess looked like. Staya was very anxious to see the Pope. Normally, there shouldn't be anything that could attract her attention at this time. But Staya kept looking at the streets of the mobile city. Walking in this great city, Staya couldn't even feel the difference between it and other normal cities. There were all kinds of facilities, even a market. But such a normal-looking city was actually traversed through mountains and valleys to get here. It made a giant city appear out of thin air in the snow-fire plains that was usually uninhabited overnight. Staya, who had seen the fortress before, imagined the scene of the city standing up and then towering into the clouds. Staya couldn't help but shiver. At that moment, her heart seemed to have become colder than this world of ice and snow. A miraculous project like the mobile city was undoubtedly impossible to complete in just a few years. This meant that the Snow Wind Empire had been preparing for many years, and Jilin had only appeared in the human world for a few years, so who was this thing prepared for? Who did the Snow Wind Empire want to use this city against? Naturally, it was the other human empires including the Saimai Empire. At that moment, Staya's mood became a lot more complicated. Due to Staya's special identity, she quickly met the Iron Blood King with Bane. Bane was also very excited, but not because of the great mobile city, but because he had never seen the Emperor of the Empire before, so he was naturally nervous. When the Iron Blood King heard that Staya was here, he immediately put down everything he was doing and quickly went to meet Staya. It wasn't just because Staya was the princess of the Saimai Empire. It was also because the Iron Blood King thought that Staya was the human who had been in contact with the Red Disaster the longest, so she must have a lot of information about Jilin. Now that a great battle was imminent, this information could be very important. Although the saying "know thyself and know thy enemy and you will be victorious in every battle" was a bit exaggerated, there was nothing wrong with it. Staya walked into the biggest palace in the mobile city under the guidance of the crowd. The Iron Blood King was already sitting on the high throne, waiting for her. Staya quickly walked in front of the Iron Blood King and bowed slightly to show her respect. Staya was very close to the Iron Blood King. He was so close that Staya could see the slightest change in the Iron Blood King's expression. The Iron Blood King's facial expression was complicated, which was rare. Excitement, anticipation, concern, doubt, most of them were kind. Staya could feel it. But what was even more obvious was that everyone could see that the Iron Blood King was trying his best to organize his words. He had a lot of things he wanted to say, but he wanted to make them as short and clear as possible. He needed to think about it. Staya, of course, would not wait for the Iron Blood King to organize his speech. She immediately said, "Iron Blood King, Your Majesty, I want to see the Pope." The Iron Blood King was interrupted by Staya, but he was not unhappy at all. Instead, he was obviously relieved that he did not have to start the conversation. With someone starting the conversation, it would be easier to talk. So the Iron Blood King replied, "He's not here." Staya's beautiful eyes slowly widened. She was a bit shocked. She never thought that a person like the Pope would leave their base at such a critical moment. "Then, I would like to see the Son of God," Staya said. "He's not here," the Iron Blood King said. Staya was completely confused. She did not know what to do. It was fine if the Pope was not here, but this person was rarely seen. To put it nicely, he was elusive. She had only seen the Pope a few times since she was young, so it was normal for him not to be here. Uncle Lord, on the other hand, is a very steady person. Whether the Pope was here or not, he had always taken care of the Church of Light. In the eyes of outsiders, he was already the Pope. It was impossible for him not to be here. Did something happen? Staya looked at Beiluo, who was standing on the side. She hoped that he could give her a detailed explanation. She could not rely on the Iron Blood King for this. The Iron Blood King did not like to talk. Who in the royal family of the Empire did not know? If she wanted him to give a detailed explanation, it would probably be her father, the sacred king, who came. She seemed to be lacking a bit of weight. Beluo asked the Iron Blood King with his eyes. After the Iron Blood King nodded slightly, Beluo said, "Your Highness, the Pope and the Son of God have already left with the Church of Light a day ago." Left? Why? Staya asked. The Pope said that in the war between the Snow Wind Empire and the Dwarf Kingdom, the Church of Light will not help us, but will save the soldiers from both sides. The Snow Wind Empire cannot let people who are not on the same side as us appear in our camp during the war, Beluo said. Staya was stunned. She suddenly felt that the Pope was not as useless as she thought. This action completely carried out the teachings of the Church of Light. Light, pity the world, grace the world. But it was not pleasing. Now was not the time to think about this. Then where did they go? Staya asked. In the snow-fire plains, at the border between snow and fire, Beluo said. Where is that? The front line of the battle between the dwarves and the Snow Wind Empire. Staya sighed and looked at the Iron Blood King. She thought that since she could not find the Pope, it would be the same if she could convince the Iron Blood King. May I ask your Highness the Iron Blood King, why did you mobilize so many people this time? Is the target Jilin? Staya asked. Jilin, the Iron Blood King thought for a while and said, the name of the Red Disaster? Yes, Staya said. Yes, the Iron Blood King said. Since the target is Jilin, then why did you declare war with the dwarves? How innocent are the dwarves? In these years, the dwarves and the Snow Wind Empire were very close. They were a rare and friendly neighbor. The entire continent knew about this. But now, the Iron Blood King wanted to attack the dwarves because of a creature that had nothing to do with him. It was very chilling. This kind of betrayal, bullying the weak, and harming the innocent would hurt the Iron Blood King's benevolence. I hope your Highness the Iron Blood King will reconsider, Staya said in a low voice. Ha ha ha, what a joke! My king's name is Iron Blood. Where did the benevolence come from? Your Highness, don't use the Simi Empire's methods on my Snow Wind Empire, Duke Lawrence couldn't help but say. The Duke still wanted to say something, but seeing the Iron Blood King raise his hand, he snorted angrily and didn't say anything else. It's related to the survival of the human race. No, it's for the sake of it. No, it's for the sake of it, the Iron Blood King said laboriously. If that's the case, may I ask your Highness the Iron Blood King, if Jilin has already left the Dwarf Empire, will the Snow Wind Empire still fight with the dwarves? Staya said. Yes. Why is that? Staya said anxiously. You know, the Iron Blood King looked straight into Staya's eyes and said slowly. Staya was speechless, because she did know. These words were said with a sliver of hope. It would be a blessing if they succeeded, and it would be natural if they failed. Therefore, the Iron Blood King's words were within Staya's expectations. Forgive me for being direct, but Jilin's strength is probably far beyond your expectations. I know that the Snow Wind Empire is no longer what it used to be, but it seems like there's still a huge difference if you want to defeat Jilin, Staya said. Your Highness, forgive me for not understanding, but why do you keep speaking for the Red Calamity? You were kidnapped by the Red Calamity, and the Red Calamity destroyed the capital of the Simi Empire, Sacred City. Logically speaking, you should be the one who hates the Red Calamity the most, Duke Lawrence frowned and said suspiciously. What do you mean by that? Staya said angrily. Your Highness, please calm down, Duke Lawrence did not mean to suspect the princess. He was just a bit confused, please forgive him, Bello said hastily. Staya tried hard to suppress her anger and said, I just don't want to see the warriors of my human race sacrificed for nothing, so I came to remind you that Jilin is undefeatable. Iron Blood King, please think carefully about your choice. The Iron Blood King shook his head slightly and said, I didn't want to win. Staya really didn't understand now, didn't want to win? Then why did he start a war? The Iron Blood King nodded to Bello. He signaled for Bello to explain to Staya. Bello then said, Your Highness, you don't know, but all of the human empires have already united and vowed to fight against the Red Calamity. We are only the vanguard, and our goal is only to test the enemy's strength. The future will be the time when humans truly fight against the Red Calamity. The failure now is only for the victory in the future. The warrior's blood won't be shed for nothing, they will all be heroes of the human race. This is only your wishful thinking, the heroes you speak of might not think this way. They are only under the military order, and have no choice but to launch a desperate attack against an undefeatable enemy, Staya said. This is the sacrifice of the human race. For the final victory, this sacrifice is necessary. Please maintain your respect, Your Highness, the Duke said. Moths flying into flames is also very heroic, but no one will say that it is a heroic sacrifice, they will only say that it is self-destruction, Staya said. Little flying insects only act based on their instincts, they don't know life and death. How can they be compared to humans? Bello said. In Jilin's eyes, they are all the same. Chapter 55. You. The Duke stepped forward. Enough, the Iron Blood King said. Is there really no way to change it? Staya looked at the Iron Blood King. The Iron Blood King shook his head slowly. Staya's eyes dimmed. She knew she had failed. This was the first time the Iron Blood King expressed his decision clearly. Staya was a princess. Of course, she knew that a king would not make any decision easily. Because any decision they made would affect the fate of many people. A slight change would affect the entire situation. But, once they made a decision, they could not change it. All kings had a perverted obsession with the saying, "Kings do not lie." Because it would allow them to feel the sense of security of holding the supreme power in their hands. It was ridiculous. The people with the most power were the ones with the least sense of security. They thought that everyone would covet their power. They did not trust anyone. That was why they were lonely. That was why they called themselves loners. The war was unavoidable. Life was not as smooth as it seemed. People needed to be fated to achieve anything. The right time, the right place, and the right people were all important. So, most of the time, there was nothing they could do. The moon replaced the sun again and occupied the sky. Without the suppression of the sun, the stars shone brightly. But tonight, it was not as quiet as usual. It was as if thunder had exploded on the ground. The continuous roar spread across the snowy plains. The city was moving. Staya stood by the window and looked down at the ground that kept moving behind her. She could not help but feel like the world was under her control. If Staya was like this, then the Iron Blood King who created all of this was even more so. Staya thought, no wonder the Iron Blood King was so arrogant. He wanted to use the power of humans to fight against the Megalosaurus. People always wanted to challenge things that were beyond their abilities, even if they were covered in wounds. Because they thought they could do it. They believed that as long as they believed they could do it, they could do it. But humans had their limits. This world was just so real and cold. Objective things will not change because of the shift of one's consciousness, even if one's will is lofty and firm as a rock, even if one dies 9 times but still has no regrets. However, some people just didn't believe it. They said that man could conquer the heavens. They felt that they could move the heavens and move the earth. Even if he didn't drown to death in the end, he definitely wouldn't feel good. If he didn't really fall, he wouldn't be able to see his own ability clearly. You won't look at reality seriously until you've been beaten black and blue by it. You won't shed tears until you see the coffin. You won't turn back until you hit the southern wall. This was not something that could be done by human power. However, humans were not frogs at the bottom of a well. They were a great race. They have a tradition of creating miracles. Humans believe that anything was possible. This sentence was particularly convincing in a mobile city. After all, if a city could run, what else was impossible? From Staya's point of view, the city and the people on it were sprinting toward the south wall at a frightening speed. Moreover, the people in power had already prepared for the worst, and there was no way to change it. If this went on, there were only 2 possibilities. One was to hit the wall and make a shocking roar, and then the mobile city and the human race would be smashed into pieces. Or, they would smash a hole in the south wall. At that time, the dragon race, which was comparable to the gods, would just be animals in the eyes of humans. There were many creatures in this world that were stronger than humans. Lions, tigers, crocodiles, elephants, and even various magic beasts. Weren't they all trampled under the feet of humans in the end? How could the dragon race be an exception? This was the world of humans. Even if it was a god, if they wanted to survive in this world, they had to ask for the permission of humans first. Humans could say that with a swagger. Although the possibility was very small, but it was this small possibility that could make humans even more crazy. The dwarves had arrived at the battlefield earlier than the humans because they needed to build a position and had more preparation work to do. The humans obviously didn't need it now. A mobile city sat here and everything was ready. A city appeared on the battlefield out of thin air, turning a positional battle into a defensive battle. Was there any better preparation than this? All the inventions of humans seemed to be for slacking off and pleasing themselves. Dan, who was working hard to build a position, couldn't help but complain in his heart. He looked up and glanced around. He was surrounded by dwarves who were bending over to work. He couldn't help but smile, thinking that the king's decision was really wise. Drinking all the wine in the dwarves' collection, it must be known that the wine cellar of the dwarves had never been empty. When it was difficult, everyone could not drink, but the wine cellar could not be empty. The wine was placed in piles there. As long as everyone looked at it, they would feel a lot happier. Even if they couldn't drink it, they could comfort themselves by saying that it would be better to drink it in the future. This time, the wine cellar was empty. After many dwarves sobered up, they looked at the empty wine cellar and were speechless on the spot, with a look of hopelessness on their faces. It seemed that they wanted to find a way to die on the spot. It just so happened that the war was imminent. It was really good that someone gave them a pillow when they were about to doze off, and they were about to go to war when they wanted to die. The dwarves were all eager to fight, and the atmosphere was high. If they didn't love life, why would they be afraid of death? In the 10 minutes that Dan was lost in his thoughts, a medium-sized annihilation cannon that could be operated by one person had been assembled. The parts were already cast, and now it was just assembling, so there was no need to concentrate or be distracted. This kind of work could be done by any dwarf with their eyes closed while chatting with others. The medium-sized annihilation cannon was the backbone weapon of the dwarves this time. Its attack speed was fast, and its power was not exaggerated. It was equivalent to a 6th-order gold-rank magician who did not need to cool down. It also had a self-destruct function. From the outside, it looked like a huge cannon, but the difference was that there was a control room at the end of the cannon, which could only accommodate one dwarf sitting inside to adjust the direction and fire. Such weapons were densely packed in this position, and there were countless of them. But the real highlight was still that one. Dan turned his head to look at the god-killing cannon that stood behind the dwarf's position like a mountain peak. It was a weapon that was enough to kill gods. Its huge muzzle, which was glowing with cold light, was already aimed in the direction of the Snow Wind Empire. Even the dwarves of the same camp could feel its danger. Dan believed that no matter what blocked the god-killing cannon, there would only be one end, which was to turn into ashes. "Your Majesty, the preparations are ready. Everything is ready," the dwarf guard reported to the dwarf king. "Did I really do the right thing?" the dwarf king muttered to himself. Although he had already made up his mind, after all, it was the lives of so many of his compatriots, and they had not drunk enough wine. After all, it was related to the survival of the dwarves. At the last moment, even the dwarf king could not help but doubt the decision he had made. Was it worth it? For dignity, was it really worth it to lose their lives? For the sake of spreading the story of the dwarves in the world, was it really worth it to let the dwarves disappear? The guard lowered his head slightly and said, "Your Majesty, don't think too much. Your wavering at this time is a major blow to our army's morale. This kind of thing is not up to us. Since that is the case, we might as well act according to our hearts." Anyway, only God knows whether it is right or wrong. Whether it is a merit or a demerit, leave it to future generations to judge. We don't need to worry about nothing. The Dwarf King sighed and glanced at the moving city that was rushing over from afar. You are right. The situation is pressing. The arrow is on the bow, and it has to be shot. It is useless to think too much. The Dwarf King raised his fist and shouted, "Formation! Pass the king's order, formation! Pass the king's order, pass!" This voice echoed throughout the battlefield. All the annihilation cannons lit up with a green indicator light at the back, which meant that they could fire at any time. A violent rumbling sound came, suppressing all the other sounds. It was deafening. The moving city began to slow down and stopped in front of the dwarves' formation. Due to the arrival of the two moving cities, a violent wind was set off on the plains out of thin air. It blew a lot of snow from the Snow Wind Empire to the Dwarf Kingdom. It blew so hard that the dwarves could not open their eyes. The reason why they did not directly rush into the dwarves' camp was because it was a human tradition to say a few words before starting a war. The moving city was completely still, followed by a series of mechanical sounds. All the weapons on the moving city had been activated. It was also a human tradition to show off their strength before speaking. The battlefield of the Snow Wind Empire was in the north, a world of ice and snow. The battlefield of the Dwarf Kingdom was in the south, an endless red volcanic landscape. Between the two armies was the junction of the snow-fire plains, a gray area with neither snow nor fire. But the sun slowly rose above it, dyeing it with a faint layer of gold. Both sides opened their weapons and confronted each other. Swords were drawn. Chapter 56. As people said, there would always be a moment of peace before the storm. When the mobile city was ready, the battlefield finally quieted down. Everyone held their breaths, their nerves were extremely tense, and their foreheads were covered with sweat. Their hands were on the buttons and triggers, and they held their weapons tightly. But they controlled themselves with strong willpower not to attack. The two sides were facing each other, but it was silent. Everyone was waiting. The stage was ready, so it was time for the main character to appear. The Dwarf King stood on the platform of the god-killing cannon and stared in the direction of the mobile city. Sure enough, the Iron Blood King, surrounded by his subordinates, slowly walked to the square above the mobile city. The Iron Blood King saw the Dwarf King immediately, and their eyes met. The Iron Blood King cleared his throat and said loudly with his diamond-level strength, "Brother, how have you been? Years ago, we parted. Today, we finally meet again. I didn't expect. *CKU, we've already met on the battlefield. How can I wait for you to speak one word at a time like before? It's useless to say anything. Warriors of the dwarf race, attack, the Dwarf King shouted. Attack, the dwarf race's camp shouted. The dwarf race's camp rose, and immediately, a colorful barrage of energy bombs flew high into the sky and fell toward the mobile city. This was the beginning of the war. It was just a human tradition to say a few words before the war. The Iron Blood King looked up at the colorful energy bombs falling toward him like raindrops. There was no fear or panic in his eyes. There was only admiration for the Dwarf King. People who didn't talk much would always admire people who did things quickly and efficiently. Because he could always make himself talk less. Although the Iron Blood King admired the Dwarf King very much, the Dwarf King didn't appreciate him at all. The Dwarf King pointed at the mobile city where the Iron Blood King was and said to his subordinates, "Stupid humans, you exposed your position as the commander just because of this. Aim the god-killing cannon at the mobile city. As long as we destroy it, the humans will be anxious to confirm whether the Iron Blood King is alive or dead. They will be in chaos, and then our chance will come. If we can kill the Iron Blood King directly, we'll win." "Yes," the guard replied, but then he asked doubtfully, "But your majesty, you've also exposed your position." "Idiot, aren't I just about to move?" The Dwarf King said. "Your majesty is wise." When the beautiful energy bomb flew through the sky, it looked exactly like a meteor. The energy bullets that filled the sky were like a meteor shower. Dragging its long tail, it drew out a gorgeous trajectory. However, that was the trajectory of death. Staya thought. Just as these meteors were about to hit the sky above the moving city, it was as if they had hit a transparent wall. They exploded one after another. The meteor turned into a splendid firework. Although the shield that protected the entire mobile city was raging, it did not shatter. The Dwarf King looked at the scene and sighed. I didn't expect the Snow Wind Empire to join hands with the Church of Light. The guard asked, Your Majesty, what should we do? Continue to fight. The Pope has already said that he will no longer intervene in the war between us and the Snow Wind Empire. Moreover, as far as we know, the Snow Wind Empire does not have the ability to arrange such a huge array. Knock it off first. Yes. Then the continuous attacks came one after another. The soldiers and the cannons pressed the firing button tightly. It seemed that even if he died at this moment, his hand would not let go. The Duke looked at the dwarf's decisive attack and said, Your Majesty, the Dwarf King does not seem to be scared by us. Of course. The Iron Blood King said. Then we should fight back. Your Majesty, please give the order to attack. As long as the mobile city rushes into the enemy's formation, we will win this battle. The Duke said. No rush, first, we should test the waters. The Iron Blood King waved his hand. The Duke heard this and his expression was slightly sad. According to his idea, it was a sure thing, but the Iron Blood King wanted to sacrifice the lives of many soldiers for nothing. The Duke knew that perhaps for the Emperor, using the soldiers' lives to test the waters was the most cost-effective and safest action. But to the Duke, every soldier on the battlefield was his comrade in arms, his soldiers. They should not be sacrificed so easily, but he did not say anything and carried out the Iron Blood King's order. Because he knew that on the battlefield, no matter how bad the idea of the commander was, it was better than having two voices. On the battlefield, there were thousands of changes in an instant. How could there be time for discussion, hesitation, and disobedience? The firepower of the mobile city was fully unleashed, and the dwarves' energy bombs reflected each other. Although it was not absolute suppression, it had effectively dispersed the dwarves' firepower. A heavy cavalry unit of the Snow Wind Empire took advantage of this opportunity to rush out of the mobile city under the rain of bullets, vowing to rush into the enemy's formation. But it was not a wise move to deal with the dwarves with cavalry. The dwarves themselves were shorter than humans, and it would be more difficult for the cavalry to attack while sitting on horseback. On the other hand, the dwarves only needed to hold their spears against the ground and they could easily stab the cavalry and their horses to death in midair. However, if it was just a test, then the cavalry was the best choice. Because of the high mobility of the cavalry, their survival rate was higher than that of other units. If other units were 1%, then the cavalry should be able to reach 5%. Hurry up, get rid of the muzzle above. His grandmother, the firepower is too fierce. What the hell is this? A dwarf captain said. Well said, let the humans see the super long-range artillery of our dwarves. One of the cannons with a particularly long barrel shot out a red ray after accumulating power. That was the trace left by the friction and burning air as the shell flew past at high speed. The shell passed through the protective shield in an instant and caused a violent explosion on the outer wall of the mobile city, causing the humans to exclaim. The dwarf who fired the shell looked seriously through the scope for a long time, and then cursed, his mother, I missed. You waste, you only know how to drink and can't do anything else. Such a precious shell only made a sound. Hurry up and fire again. If you miss again this time, I will kick you to death. The dwarf captain said. The dwarf who fired the shell was preparing to fire again and scolded back, you hurry up and get out of here. It's so far away. If you miss a little here, the other side will miss a lot. If you can do it, then why don't you do it? You talk as if you can shoot very accurately. What are you pretending to be an elf for? The dwarf said while preparing to fire again. When he was ready, he suddenly realized that the captain had not talked back for such a long time. This was so abnormal that the dwarf couldn't help but stand up from the control room and poke his head out. After just a glance, he sat back down. The captain had fallen to the ground and was lying in a pool of blood. Looking at the situation, it was most likely his own blood. The captain should not have been killed by a human stray bullet. If it was a human shell, the corpse would not be so intact. It was more like a human shell fell to the ground, and the small stones that exploded went through the captain's body. The captain's death could be said to be without warning and silent. Extremely unlucky. Lu Nu had now been automatically promoted from a gunner to a captain. He couldn't help but think that it was no wonder that people said that the battlefield was the fastest place for soldiers to be promoted. Not just because of the military merits you have gained. It may also be because your boss is dead, but Lu Nu was not happy at all, because he and the captain were very good friends in private, and the two had given each other their own proud works. Lu Nu thought that this was good. All the wine in your house was mine. But you're already gone. If I die too, who's going to drink my wine? You unlucky guy. You dare to be one step ahead of me? But Lu Nu did not show these emotions. He just sat in the control room, looking serious, staring at the sight, and said fiercely, "I'll go to your grandmother. Look. Someone is coming out." A dwarf scout shouted. "It's cavalry. It's cavalry. They're really coming to die. Brothers, hit them hard, don't let any of them go back. The humans look down on us too much. Today, we'll teach them a lesson." In the case of a strong city to defend, the humans actually sent out a group of soldiers, and it was the cavalry that was most restrained by the dwarves. This was undoubtedly a provocation by the humans. All the dwarves believed so in their hearts. Suddenly, all the firepower was tilted to the cavalry as much as possible. The pressure on the leading knight suddenly increased. Because he needed to lead the team to determine the direction, charge left and right, and avoid the enemy's attacks. But the enemy's attacks suddenly became so dense. This made him feel a little powerless. Who could go out to play in the rain and not get wet by a drop of rain? Even if you were holding an umbrella and wearing a raincoat and rain shoes. Who could really pass through thousands of flowers and not get a single leaf on their body? No one. So, knights began to fall from their horses constantly, and then were trampled into meat paste by their companions behind them. The solid heavy armor on their bodies was enough to withstand energy bombs, but it could not withstand hundreds and thousands of trampling by warhorses. Falling from a warhorse and being trampled to death by their companions was the most painful and cruel way to die as a knight. The charging cavalry would not stop just because their teammates were lying in front of the horse's hooves. It was too late, and it could not be. William listened to the screams of his teammates behind him, and he was very distressed and anxious. He wanted to grind his steel teeth, and his expression was extremely ferocious, but he was powerless. Every scream behind him seemed to cut his heart with a knife. In the end, William even hoped that the next one to die would be himself. He knew very well that this mission was a narrow escape. The Duke had personally issued the mission to test the enemy's strength. But he did not say to what extent the test would be. The cavalry behind him was definitely not weak, but in a war of this scale, it was just a small stone that could not stir up any waves. Test the enemy's strength? For the little power he had at hand, it was bottomless. There was no return. William could have refused this mission, but based on the knight's spirit of sacrifice and the aristocratic family style, he did not do so. He believed that these valiant knights could only play a greater role under his command. In other words, their deaths were more valuable. Now, he looked up at the rain of bullets in the sky and listened to the screams of his teammates behind him. His eyes narrowed into slits, and he shouted, F***CKU. Chapter 57. The people who had the deepest experience of war were undoubtedly William and the other soldiers who were fighting on the front lines. Because they were the people closest to death, they were angry because of the death of their closest friends. Because the superiors despised the lives of their comrades, they hated war, and thus changed their original intention. Although Lu Nu and William were in different camps, they were both cursing war. These scenes were playing out all the time on the battlefield. But the superiors would never hear this voice. Or rather, they would not care if they heard it. The war was in full swing, and it was hard to stop. The cavalry led by William finally disappeared under the concentrated fire of the dwarves, like a boat overturned by a huge wave. Ha ha! Well done! Let's see if the humans dare to come out of the big turtle shell this time. Continue to fight, don't stop. Fight! Your Majesty, the cavalry sent out has been completely annihilated. Duke Lawrence said with pain and regret. The Duke had already seen many dead people on the battlefield. It was reasonable to say that even if he could not be indifferent to life and death, he should always be able to calmly wait. But this time, the Duke had such a big reaction because of those knights, which was really abnormal. Because in his view, these people's deaths were completely meaningless. He did not understand why the Iron Blood King would make such a decision. The Iron Blood King looked up at the sky for a while and sighed. The times have changed. The Duke lowered his head and frowned, thinking hard about the Iron Blood King's meaning. These words must have a deep meaning. But after 2 seconds, he gave up. The Duke was definitely a person who could judge the situation clearly and knew how to give up. It was neither the time nor the place to figure out the superior's intentions. Moreover, this was not something he should do. Your Majesty, please order the whole army to attack. A lion will use all its strength to catch a rabbit. We must not be careless, not to mention the strength of the dwarves. The Duke said. I, already, understand. Go. The Iron Blood King said. Yes, Your Majesty. The Duke bowed his head and cupped his fist. His action was simple and powerful. The arm and hand armor collided, making a unique sound of armor. The Duke understood this time. This was the meaning of allowing the whole army to attack. At this moment, the Duke officially had full command of the army and became the commander of the Snow Wind Empire's army. The Duke turned around and flung his cloak behind him. He then walked towards the Iron Blood King with a majestic gait. His combat boots stepped on the hard ground with great power. Once a general had an army in his hands, his entire person would undergo an earth-shattering change. The flood dragon entered the sea, and the fierce tiger came out of the cage. He was like a fish in water. The war had only just begun. On a mountain not far from the Snowfire battlefield, there were round igloos that did not fit in with the surrounding environment. Judging from the various traces, it was obvious that they had just been built. Other than humans, there was no other creature that could break the harmony of the environment so thoroughly. Your Holiness, they're fighting, Lord said. The Pope rolled his eyes and said, Is that so? Where? Why can't I see it? Lord was speechless. How could I not see such a huge formation? Do I need you to tell me that? I'm not blind. The Pope glared at Lord. With a look of disdain. Lord's chest heaved up and down as he clenched and unclenched his fists. He repeated the process a few times before he managed to suppress the urge to beat the Pope up. Panting heavily, he said, What I mean is, they've started fighting. What should we do? Are we just going to watch? That's right, we're just going to watch, the Pope said matter-of-factly. Are you crazy? Lord said in disbelief. Although he already knew that the Pope was unreliable, his words were still out of Lord's expectations. The Pope was a little surprised by Lord's reaction. He looked at the battlefield and said, What are you trying to do? You want to mediate? Don't joke around. Don't be so rigid. You want to do all the good deeds? Look at the situation. Both sides are fighting until their eyes are red. If you want to mediate, who cares about you? They probably won't listen to you and will attack you too. The situation is so chaotic. Even if I want to help you after this, there's nothing I can do. Lord finally couldn't take it anymore. He rushed forward and grabbed the Pope's collar, shaking him violently. That's not what I'm talking about. No matter how stupid I am, I still know that I can't get involved in this kind of war. What I'm talking about is, didn't you promise the Iron Blood King that you would treat the wounded on both sides? Have you forgotten? Pay attention to your words, the Pope of the Church of Light. How can you go back on your word? The Pope didn't expect Lord, a bishop, to rush forward like a warrior. He was caught off guard. Ah, you're talking about that. I remember. The Pope said helplessly. Really? Lord asked doubtfully. Of course. Didn't you say that the Pope's word is law? If he says he remembers, then he really remembers. Then what do we do now? Lord asked anxiously. Wait. When they send the wounded over, we'll treat them. The Pope said. Lord heard this and looked at the Pope as if he was looking at a demon. He said with a trembling voice, Your so-called treatment, isn't it just us collecting the wounded on the battlefield and treating them? The Pope heard this and looked at Lord like he was looking at an idiot for a few seconds. Then he turned to look at the battlefield. The empty space in front of the two armies had been plowed by both sides' cannons more than 2 or 3 times. It was no longer like before, where the snow and fire were clearly separated. Instead, they were evenly blended together. The entire battlefield was filled with colorful lights. Cannon fire filled the sky, and the sound of explosions never stopped. Occasionally, there would be a particularly large explosion. The flames created by it could illuminate and warm the Pope's face from dozens of miles away. As the strongest human saint, the Pope didn't dare to say that he could completely withstand that kind of attack. And this guy in front of him actually wanted to bring people to charge in? To treat the wounded and the wounded? It's my fault. I shouldn't have left you to those old men when you were young. You've become an idiot. The Pope said sympathetically. The dead should be respected. Watch your words. Lord pushed the Pope away and said angrily. The instructor raised his hand, indicating that he didn't mean to insult those who had already passed away. Lord clearly understood the Pope's meaning. I'll sit and watch people rise and fall. I'll just sit and watch. I'll just watch you fight to the death. I don't care. If they can send the wounded over, I'll treat them. If they can't, I won't look for them. This was the smartest thing to do, but it wasn't what the Church of Light in Lord's mind would do. Lord looked at the battlefield and said solemnly, All living beings are suffering and suffering. As believers of the God of Light, we should follow the will of the God and save them from suffering. Although we're not strong enough, we should do our best. Even if we die, we won't regret it. This way, we won't disappoint the God of Light's holy light. After saying that, Lord knelt towards the sky in the direction of the battlefield. He raised his hands and sincerely prayed to the God. He begged the God to save 10 or 20% of the suffering. At this moment, Lord was undoubtedly holy. The sunlight shining on him seemed to be brighter than other places. The believers of the Church of Light who looked at the two from afar couldn't help but kneel as well. When a person was confused and helpless, the bright sunlight that shone on their body would be even warmer. The Church of Light believed that this was the gift of the God of Light. It was for the benefit of all living beings. Suddenly, Lord felt that the gift of the God of Light was blocked by something, cutting off the connection between them. He looked up and saw the Pope standing in front of him. No matter how difficult it is, people should solve their own problems. There's no need to trouble the God, the Pope said. Without the God's recognition and help, how can we save the people from suffering? Father, has your faith changed? Lord's throat felt dry. He hadn't called the Pope Father for many years. After all, it didn't look good for a man in his 70s or 80s to call a man in his 20s father. But that was one thing. The Pope had always been Lord's beloved and respectable father. Now that Lord had called him that without thinking, it was obvious how emotional he was and how he couldn't control himself. Even if you pray to the God, it won't do you any good, other than a little comfort. You should be aware of this. Moreover, all living things are born of fire and water. They live in fire and water and die in fire and water. Why do they need others to save them? A fish lives in the water, but you're afraid that it will drown and want to save it. You're not a fish, how can you know the joy of a fish? The Pope said. Are you saying that all living things can't escape this tragic fate? Lord asked. No, what I mean is, this is life. birth, aging, sickness, and death, happiness, anger, sorrow, and joy are all part of life. People enjoy it, the Pope said. Lord pointed at the battlefield and asked, "This is enjoying it?" Looking back on the bleak place, there's no wind or rain, no sun. This is a poem from the Middle Empire before the era of the gods, the Pope said. There's no wind or rain? Could it be that everything was meaningless? Then what should we do? Lord asked. Just like true light, it spreads throughout the world. Those who need it can use it as they wish. Those who don't need it can also hide under the roof. No pursuit, no hiding. It won't become brighter because of people's needs, nor will it become dimmer because of people's disgust. It's indestructible. Those who need light will receive our guidance. We are the streetlights on the path of people seeking light. We point the way for passers-by. May all who need light be illuminated by it. May the light last forever. At this moment, the Pope was also the most devout believer, but the object of his faith wasn't the God of light that existed in the teachings, but the light that existed in this world. May the light last forever, Lord echoed. May the light last forever, the other churches echoed. Their voices echoed across the entire mountain, sacred and solemn. May the light last forever, may. Chapter 58. The people of the Church of Light were singing the praises of light on the distant mountains, vowing to guide the people in the direction of light. But the people on the battlefield, whether they were dwarves or humans, had absolutely no intention of looking for light or seeking treatment from the Church of Light at this time. They were fighting bloody battles, regardless of their own safety. In the endless explosions and flames, in a situation where they could die at any time, they still only wanted to attack the enemy and crush them into powder. Then, they would crush their bones and scatter their ashes. If before the war, the dwarves were willing to hand over Jilin and his party, or the Snow Wind Empire did not care about the political significance that only humans had, then this war could be avoided. However, since one person on each side died, this war had become a war that could not be avoided. Because the two sides had become blood feuds and were absolutely irreconcilable. The war situation that most humans envisioned did not appear. They could not easily crush the dwarves. They did not expect that the dwarves' resistance would be so tough. The strength of the dwarves greatly exceeded people's expectations. The dwarves in their memory who were proud of forging and obsessed with swords were gone forever. Now the dwarves were holding all kinds of powerful weapons and shooting at them. Without the protection of the mobile city, only a wave of fire could make the careless humans suffer heavy losses. The humans felt that it was a little unexpected. Didn't they say that the dwarves in the Snow Wind Empire and the dwarves of the Dwarf Kingdom were hostile to each other? Didn't they say that the dwarves of the Dwarf Kingdom advocated tradition and resisted new technology? Then, where did all these strange spears and cannons come from? How was this resisting new technology? This was simply being immersed in it for a long time. Your Majesty, after so many years of hiding your strength and biding your time, the results are really remarkable. Dan said. Humans still underestimate us dwarves. But you, for the sake of the kingdom, have left your homeland for many years and endured humiliation in the human empire. You have been wronged. The Dwarf King said. For the sake of the Dwarf Kingdom, it is natural to go through water and tread on fire. Your Majesty has spoken too seriously. Dan said with a smile. The Dwarf King waved his hand and said, "This is too damn fake." Sure enough, after staying with humans for a long time, you can't learn anything good. Dan Mu chuckled and said, "Your Majesty is right." However, His Majesty has been developing in secret for so many years, creating a show of discord between both sides for the Snow Wind Empire to see. To be so cautious, could it be that they had already anticipated today's situation? The Dwarf King shook his head. Just in case. As a king, how could he completely trust others? How could he not have a backup plan? Sigh, after spending so much time with humans, I really can't learn anything good. How would I know this before? Dan Mu said, the dwarves are only able to achieve what they have today because of your Majesty's careful planning and foresight. The Dwarf King shook his head again and said, "It's all because of the humans' carelessness. My dwarf kingdom has eyes and ears all over the Snow Wind Empire. Every move of the Snow Wind Empire is within my grasp." The Iron Blood King knew all of this, but he never interfered. On the other hand, there are almost none of the spies that the humans have planted among us. This means that the humans don't care about us at all. They think that as long as they want, they can make our dwarf kingdom disappear from the map at any time. Now, the humans have suffered the consequences of their own actions, Danmu said. Humans, sometimes they are indeed arrogant and stupid, but they are definitely not idiots. They dare to look down on us because they have full confidence. The Dwarf King moved the city with his finger and said slowly. The moving city suddenly shook, and a few huge metal legs stretched out from the bottom of the city. From afar, it looked like a crab or a spider. But the difference was that the moving city had edges and corners, and the whole body was made of stone and steel. A few metal legs stretched out completely, and they slowly lifted the whole city. Or rather, the moving city stood up. It towered into the clouds. The scene of a city standing up was undoubtedly spectacular and magnificent. At the same time, it brought a huge sense of oppression and impact. Danmu couldn't help but gasp. The Dwarf King was still calm. Looking at the moving city in midair, he asked Danmu in a deep voice, "Now, do you think that my decision to go to war was a wrong decision? There is no one else here, so you can say it. For the dwarves, even if I have to go through water and tread on fire, I will not hesitate." Danmu's voice was low, like a heavy stone. It was also like the weight contained in his words. The Dwarf King nodded, and didn't say that he was lying this time, adjust the god-slaying cannon. "Even if we are really fish, we have to break through his net," the Dwarf King said. "Yes, it has been prepared for a long time, and we are just waiting for your Majesty's order." Yes. The moving city had started to operate, and the people in the city were doing their jobs, and didn't dare to leave their posts. Even the Iron Blood King was the same. Because when the moving city was active, running around in the city was undoubtedly a dangerous thing. No one could guarantee that the street you were walking on wouldn't suddenly change direction. The tall wall next to you might suddenly fall on you. The moving city was moving, and the inside of the city was turning upside down. Every building in every street was constantly changing. Most people had already retreated to the core-controlled area. Bane was the only one who was moving unsteadily through the empty and ever-changing streets. Bane came to the moving city with Staya. When Staya was received by the Iron Blood King, he was also treated as a guest of honor, and was treated with good food and drinks. When Staya was put under house arrest, he was also immediately controlled. From a guest of honor to a prisoner. There was no transition at all. Bane was picked up from the dining table and thrown into a windowless room. Fortunately, he was brought here by the princess of the Saimai Empire, and others were still angry with him. Just a few hours ago, Aisha suddenly appeared in front of him and gave him 2 crystals. Aisha told Bane to find Staya, and take her away from this place. Bane thought, why don't you go find her? You come and go so easily, and the defense system that the Snow Wind Empire is so proud of doesn't seem to exist in front of you. Didn't the guard tell me that even mosquitoes can't enter? You can directly take her away, and take me away while you are at it. Why do you have to make me come here? Moreover, she might not be willing to go with me. After all, she came here by herself. Without a conclusion, how can she be willing to leave? As for taking Staya away by force, Bane didn't even dare to think about it. The memory of Staya hitting white snow with her shield and sending her flying was still fresh in Bane's mind. But these thoughts, these doubts, these complaints, Bane didn't tell Aisha. Instead, he simply agreed. It was as if he was saying, if there's anything, just say the word, and I'll do it. Because he saw anxiety, solemnity, nervousness on Aisha's face. And it was to the extent that even Aisha couldn't hide it, and Bane could easily see it. These expressions on Aisha's face were too scary. What the hell is going on? Bane felt that even if he, Jilin, and Staya suddenly died, Aisha wouldn't be so agitated. At most, she would be curious about how they died. No, it would be more accurate to say that even if a meteorite destroyed a human empire, Aisha wouldn't be so agitated. At most, she would gently flick her fingernails beside the meteorite crater and say something like, "Humans are so weak," or "Heaven and earth are heartless." If it was the Simai Empire that was destroyed, Aisha might even be happy. But it was such a person that she was so nervous and uneasy now. Bane didn't ask what happened. He didn't want to think about it, and he didn't want to know at all. It was terrifying to think about it. Bane kept moving forward. He still had no idea how to take Staya away, but now he could only take one step at a time. He didn't want to anger Aisha, this dangerous woman. Aisha gave Bane the feeling that she was a swamp with lush aquatic plants and a layer of clear water. From afar, it looked peaceful and beautiful. Once he got close, there was a bloody smell. It was the traces left by countless creatures that sank into the swamp. It turned into nutrients to nourish the aquatic plants. Even though the scenery was beautiful, it was creepy. After Aisha told Bane what to do, she hurriedly teleported away using the teleportation array. Aisha was a smart person. If Bane could think of something, she could naturally think of it too. She also wanted to teleport to Staya and take her away. It would also save Jilin the trouble of finding her. But as long as Staya didn't purposely suppress some of the power of the Book of Light, then Aisha couldn't teleport to Staya's surroundings. Aisha also tried, but now it seemed that Staya didn't care about that. As soon as Aisha came out of the teleportation array, the automatic protection device on her body was activated. A layer of protection covered Aisha's body. It was supposed to be a powerful device to prevent sneak attacks, but it was used up here. Because it was extremely high up in the sky. There was strong wind and extremely low temperature. The automatic protection device judged that if it wasn't activated, even Aisha's body that was far stronger than a diamond-level warrior couldn't withstand it. It was lonely at the top. The higher it was, the more it was so. Why did Aisha come to such a high place? Of course, it was because of the red-haired young man with wings standing in the air beside her. Jilin and Aisha wanted to pick up Staya and leave after they finished forging weapons, but they happened to see the battle between the humans and the dwarves. Jilin was interested, so he flew here with Aisha and overlooked the entire battlefield. They had been watching for a while. A group of ants, fighting quite happily. Jilin thought. Chapter 59. Jilin stood in the sky, indifferently looking down at the crowd that was bustling with activity, yet clearly separated from each other. The hurricane at a very high altitude was madly hitting his body. But it couldn't shake his clothes at all. In the eyes of others, he was like a god. Although Jilin was very far away from the battlefield, with Jilin's eyesight, as long as he wanted to, he could naturally see everyone's expression clearly. They were like children squatting on the ground, excitedly watching the war of the ant colony. Some people roared angrily while attacking the enemy. Some people were trembling all over, with tears streaming down their faces. They looked very scared. But he still gritted his teeth and insisted on staying in his position, not running away. There were also dwarfs who were seriously injured, bleeding non-stop. He was surrounded by his companions, but no one looked at him. He didn't make any noise himself, but just lay there quietly, waiting for death. Because everyone, including himself, knew that this person was hopeless. Jilin looked down quietly. There were all kinds of people. But here, there was only cruelty, only ferocity, only hoarse shouting. The battlefield of raging fire was the hell described in human legends. Devoid of humanity, it was too horrible to look at. But Jilin didn't think so. Not only did he not feel sad, but he even wanted to laugh a little. He was too weak. Countless precious and short lives were squandered away in such a meaningless manner like flowing water. Why don't you know how to cherish your short lives? Humans always believed that there were many things more important than their lives. Love, country, freedom, in the eyes of humans, it seemed that compared with these beautiful words, life immediately became not worth mentioning. Some people said that if life didn't have love, then it was meaningless and tasteless. Some people said that if you want to live, you should avoid it because of misfortune or fortune. Some people said that if you don't have freedom, you would rather die. In the eyes of humans, life was too worthless. Didn't humans know that life was the prerequisite for these things? Was there a mistake somewhere? According to human words, this was called putting the cart before the horse. Staya had taught him. In Jilin's heart, if life was a plate of delicious braised meat, then things like love were like sugar in the meat. Although it was important and indispensable, if there really wasn't, then there was nothing. Braised meat with soy sauce was also delicious, but humans didn't think so. They thought that things like love and freedom were meat. Life was just a plate for meat. When there is nothing on the plate, what is the point of it? Then, when humans who thought like this really went to die for these things like freedom, and when they were on the verge of death, would they really not be afraid and regret? Jilin was very doubtful. Jilin stared at the dwarf lying on the ground waiting for death. Look, he's about to die. He doesn't even have the strength to open his eyes. He should have realized what he was about to face, right? The eternal darkness's self-existence. There was no thought, no feeling, no fear, no pain. Nothing. Nothing. He should be afraid. After all, it was just a weak low-level race that seemed to have only lived for 30 years. He should regret it. It was a big loss to give up his life for his country and race. He should start to call for help. He should start to struggle. What happened after death, the helplessness before death? Just thinking about it was enough to make all creatures shudder. Do you feel unreconciled? No, he didn't move. Why was his expression still so calm? Didn't move, still didn't move. Laugh your ass. You are a dying man. What's so funny about watching your teammate load a bomb? Does it still have anything to do with you? You are going to die soon, do you know that? You should release all your life to struggle now. Use your last bit of strength to persist and live. Even if you can only live for one more second, this is the instinct of living creatures. Why are you lying there quietly with a smile on your face? If you don't do something now, you won't have a chance. Don't you want to express your nostalgia for the world? Don't you want to say your last words? No, sigh dead. Is this dwarf a fool? What a waste of time. Jilin shook his head again and thought in his heart. Father was right. If he didn't cherish his own life, there was no need for others to cherish him. Just as Jilin was looking at the battlefield thoughtfully, Aisha appeared beside him. Jilin tilted his head and said, Yo, you're back? Yeah. Where did you go? Aisha moved the city with her finger and said, Let's go inside. Oh, Jilin's eyes seemed to be shining. Aisha, on the other hand, wanted to slap herself. How is it inside? Sure enough, Jilin asked curiously. Nothing special. Aisha said. Jilin looked at the city that they were walking on foot and said with some doubt, It shouldn't be, right? Why shouldn't it be? Humans are always like this. They are constantly innovating in some areas and making rapid progress, but in other areas, they are stubborn and refuse to change. They want to change, but they don't dare to change completely. They are always so timid and fearful. They are always so clingy when doing things. Isn't it normal for humans to have a lot of old things and a brand new thing? Aisha said. Makes sense. Jilin nodded and agreed with Aisha. Aisha sighed in relief. Then let's go find Staya and the others, Jilin suggested. Aisha immediately sighed in her heart. Her painstaking efforts to persuade him had all been in vain. Are we not going to watch anymore? Aisha asked with some hope. No, a group of weak and idiotic creatures. They don't know fear even when death is near. Boring, Jilin said. Jilin said and flapped his wings and flew out instantly, causing a violent sonic boom. It was like a clap of thunder. Aisha hurriedly covered her ears, but she was still a little slow. Her eardrums hurt from the vibration. But Aisha was a little glad. If there was no automatic protection device, her eardrums would have exploded directly. Aisha furrowed her brows. Eventually, she sighed and followed him. A clap of thunder suddenly sounded in the sky. If it was in normal times, it would be enough to scare the pedestrians on the road. However, in this kind of battlefield where artillery fire filled the sky, it would only be treated as an ordinary explosion and naturally ignored. It should be like this. Jilin released all his strength without hiding. Scales appeared on his body, and there seemed to be golden flames rising in his eyes. The surging dragon force seemed to have directly punched everyone's chests. It made the clap of thunder seem to explode in their ears. On the battlefield, whether dwarves or humans, it seemed that everyone's heart skipped a beat. Everyone couldn't help but stop what they were doing. Their fingers were on the button, but they couldn't press it. The sharp blade was hanging over the enemy's head, but they forgot to stab it down. The enemy also forgot to roll away from the sharp blade. It seemed that time suddenly stopped, and the picture on the battlefield was frozen at this moment. Everyone looked up, and everyone knew that something was coming. Above the sky, a red comet crossed the sky. It was about to fall into the moving city. The frozen picture was broken, and the dwarves immediately began to cheer. What did it mean to be unjust and bring about self-destruction? What did it mean to be self-inflicted? What did it mean to have eyes? They had never believed the nonsense of humans before, but today they really believed it. Humans used their strength to bully the weak, shamelessly tore up the alliance, and invaded their country. Now that they were seen by God, they immediately sent down divine punishment. A red meteorite fell and hit the moving city. It was really a direct divine punishment. They just didn't know which God was so wise. Jilin's purpose was achieved. When the megalosaurus appeared, it should be the focus of attention, and all living beings should look up. It didn't matter if you were fighting for your life or not. When he heard the dwarves cheering, Jilin couldn't help but smile. What a sensible race. Since it appeared in such a high-profile way, it naturally couldn't escape any investigation. It's him, he's here. Main cannon, bright snow sage-grade weapon in position, full protective shield, don't let him in. The Duke stood on the rooftop and shouted orders. The main show was finally here, the Duke thought to himself. Although the order was still clear, those who were familiar with the Duke could hear a trace of panic in the Duke's voice. Why would he panic? It was because he didn't believe in his own strength. Now, the Duke had what could be called the most powerful and advanced steel force of mankind. It was reasonable to say that at this time, the Duke's mentality should be that as long as these brothers are here, even if I enter the palace of the King of Hell, I dare to pluck out 3 tiger whiskers. However, in the face of the red comet, the Duke actually felt that his strength was not enough. One had to know that this was a kind of power that could move mountains and fill seas, and it didn't even need to have an endless supply of descendants. Although everyone had doubts in their hearts, they did not hesitate to carry out the Duke's order. This was the instinct and trust developed from years of war. An unprecedentedly huge white energy beam shot towards the red comet. At this time, the dwarves realized that the humans didn't use their full strength before. In the face of such a powerful energy beam, presumably, no matter what kind of meteorite it was, it would only end up in an instant. Humans already had enough power to fight against the gods. This was the judgment of countless dwarven weapon masters. Presumably, it was not wrong. Chapter 60. The mobile city's main cannon fired its most powerful attack at the fast-moving meteorite in the sky. Looking from afar, a white ray of light soared into the sky. The speed was extremely fast, and everyone clearly knew how exaggerated the destructive power of that beautiful ray of light was. It gave people the feeling of the seraph in human legends, the sword of judgment that was always burning and would never be extinguished. It was enough to cut through the dark sky and pierce through all despair. Bringing hope and light to mankind, this was the sword of judgment of mankind. Mankind was already able to bring light and hope to themselves. The Snow Wind Empire believed that nothing could stop the sword of judgment, just like no one could stop the Empire's bright future, under everyone's gaze, the sword of judgment finally met the meteorite. However, the scene of the meteorite immediately turning into a firework didn't happen as expected as people imagined. That meteorite suppressed the sword of judgment. Not to mention turning into a firework, even its speed and direction did not change in the slightest. The sword of judgment that mankind was full of confidence in seemed to have turned into a pure beam of light in front of that meteorite. There was no lethality, so it could only be easily blocked by others and kept getting shorter. The meteorite was still falling, just like the sword of judgment. There was no difference whether it was there or not. This was naturally because Jilin had opened his domain. Within 2 meters of him, only the fire element could exist, and everything else would be annihilated. The sword of judgment was eliminated before it could touch Jilin. This was the reason for the shocking scene. All the humans were dumbfounded and stood there in a daze, not knowing what to do. Only one person was an exception. The Duke roared, "Open the protective shield with all your strength." For this scene, the Duke had already faintly expected it, but he did not dare to think too deeply about it. Now that it really appeared in front of him, the Duke was naturally not as shocked as the others, but more of a feeling of as expected, or good things don't come true, bad things come true. Hearing the Duke's roar, everyone instantly moved, and the protective shield of the mobile city instantly became solid. The originally faint purple color had now become somewhat black, but from a distance, one could feel a sense of heaviness. It could be said to be impregnable. However, in the face of the meteorite falling from the sky, no one had the slightest confidence in this protective shield. He was just doing his best and leaving the rest to fate. The meteorite hit the protective shield at an extremely high speed, producing a loud bang. The protective shield did not break, and the meteorite did not turn into a firework. Instead, it miraculously stopped in front of the protective barrier after hitting it. The meteorite floated steadily in the air and did not fall. The blinding light began to weaken, and only then did people see clearly that it wasn't a meteorite, but a humanoid creature with wings on its back. No one knew what it was, but it wasn't human. The Pope's face became serious, which was rare for him. He stared at the sky in the distance and said, "They're here." Lord was startled by the Pope's sudden seriousness. Without thinking, he asked, "What's coming?" "Naturally, the Red Calamity, our target this time," the Pope replied. As soon as the Pope's voice trailed off, the red meteorite whistled through the clouds and fell towards the moving city. The mobile city's reaction was very fast, and the attacks it launched made the Pope somewhat fearful. But it was useless. In the Pope's eyes, the light was more like a guide for the meteorite. Then, the meteorite crashed into the protective shield. The loud noise caused the snow under the Pope's feet to visibly shake. The protective shield trembled violently, but in the end, it did not break. Lord looked at this scene and swallowed hard. The corners of his eyes could not stop twitching. However, the first sentence he said was not to be shocked by Jilin's strength, nor was it to praise the Snow Wind Empire's preparations. Instead, it was the witches were hiding such strength. The protective shield that blocked the terrifying meteorite was flowing with purple light. All the humans on the continent, as long as they were not blind, could easily and clearly determine that it was the work of the witches from the color. But the problem was, such a protective shield that covered the entire city was not a small project even for the witches. Who knew how much manpower and material resources it would take? And the witches had been suppressed by the Church of Light for many years, so it was reasonable to say that they should not have this ability. This matter may not be important to others, but to Lord, who had been in charge of the Church of Light for many years, this was a huge problem. It seemed to be bigger than the Sword of Judgment that had been hidden in the Snow Wind Empire for many years. It was also bigger than Jilin, who was like a divine punishment, bringing with it a terrifying power that descended upon the world. The Pope glanced at him, shook his head, and did not say anything. One cannot see Mount Tai when one is blinded by a leaf. People would always be blinded by some insignificant things, and neglect the truly important things. But it was not Lord's fault. Only the Pope knew what Lord had experienced during the years he had been in charge of the Church of Light. The place where the sun shone the brightest was also the place where the shadows were the darkest. He As the sacred king said, the red calamity is really enough to transform into a shadow that shrouds the entire human race. We should join the battle. The Pope looked at the humanoid creature floating in the air. Lord only then realized that the Pope did not agree to the people entering the battlefield to save the wounded. It turned out that he wanted to preserve his strength at this moment. To think that he could talk so much nonsense in order to stall for time. Jilin stood in the air, staring blankly at the purple in front of him. He rubbed his dizzy head with his hand. How strange. This thing was not destroyed by his domain. It was clearly not a fire elemental thing. He actually hit his head on it. It was a little embarrassing. But fortunately, no one saw it. Jilin glanced at the humans in the protective shield. They all looked like they had seen a ghost. Jilin was very satisfied because no one showed any signs of wanting to laugh. Jilin was thinking too much. Not to mention that he was wrapped in the red light and no one could see him. Even if they really saw Jilin hit his face on the protective shield, he believed that no one would be able to laugh at this moment. After all, the threat of death was only a wall away from him. The demon-like creature was casually glancing at him from the outside, like a farmer looking at the chickens in the chicken coop. Why would a farmer deliberately walk to the chicken coop to look at the chickens inside? Or to check the number of chickens to see if there were any missing? Or to see if there were any eggs? Or to think about which one to kill for tonight's dinner? This was the thought that came into the farmer's mind when he looked at his chickens. Looking at the demon-like creature outside and the humans inside, it probably wanted to kill them all. Jilin saw the Duke, who was in a very conspicuous position and dressed in a very high-profile manner. He raised his hand and greeted him. The veins on the Duke's forehead kept bulging. As if facing a great enemy, he did not dare to move. Jilin saw that the Duke was ignoring him, but he did not mind. He used his finger to gently knock on the protective shield in front of him. The protective shield suddenly made a dull dawn sound. This knock on the protective shield, and at the same time, it also knocked on the tense nerves of everyone inside the shield. Ah! Finally, a soldier could not bear the pressure brought by Jilin. He turned his gun and fired at Jilin through the protective shield. The protective shield produced by the witches was very magical and kind. It did not block the attack from the inside. The bullet smoothly passed through the protective shield and hit Jilin's body. Countless sparks gradually appeared. Jilin raised his hand and an orange-red flame ignited from his hand. Jilin stretched his hand in front of the protective shield. The shield immediately began to melt at a speed visible to the naked eye. Jilin thought that since the domain could not be broken down, he could only burn it. Soon, a hole large enough for a person to pass through was melted into the shield. Jilin slowly floated in. Sparks continued to appear on his body. He floated in front of the soldier who fired at him and looked at the weapon that was spitting out fire snakes with interest. Finally, he curiously stretched out his index finger and flicked it. The energy rapid-fire cannon was instantly shattered. The same happened to the soldiers behind. A large piece of the platform at the highest point of the mobile city was dyed red. Attack! Wait! Two voices sounded almost at the same time. The first word, attack, was naturally shouted by the Duke. As a soldier, he did not lack the quality of struggling to survive in a desperate situation. He also had the determination to perish together with the enemy in order to protect his country. Therefore, even if he knew how invincible Jilin was, he still gave the order to attack. Soldiers, no matter how they died on the battlefield, it would not be a pity. Except for waiting for death. But no one moved. They did not follow the Duke's very correct order. Because the second word, wait, was said by their emperor. The Iron Blood King walked up the stairs. Your Majesty. The Duke's eyes were about to burst. The Duke had never thought that the Iron Blood King would face this monster directly. No one dared to say what unspeakable things would happen in the next second. But the Iron Blood King was very calm. He looked at Jilin and said, I've heard a lot about you. Jilin did not expect that he was so famous. His mood suddenly became much better. He said to the Iron Blood King, "You don't have to be nervous. I don't mean any harm, and I don't want to interfere in the war between you and the dwarves." The Iron Blood King turned his head and looked at the blood splattered all over the ground like plum blossoms. His face slightly darkened, but he did not say anything. Jilin said to himself, "I just want to take my partner away. Her name is Staya. You should know that she is the princess of your human race. Bring her to me, and I will leave." The Iron Blood King was about to open his mouth when he heard a voice from the sky. "No!" Jilin looked up angrily. Who was so arrogant? Was there no way to negotiate? A man fell from the sky in front of Jilin's eyes and stood side by side with the Iron Blood King. It was the Pope. Jilin looked at the white-haired young man. Why did he look so familiar? Chapter 61. Jilin frowned and thought for a while. This person should be the one that Aisha mentioned a while ago. There didn't seem to be anything special about him. What did you just say? Jilin pretended not to hear him for Aisha's sake and gave the Pope a chance to reorganize his words. Staya is the princess of the Simai Empire and the saintess of the Church of Light. You want to take her away with just a few words? Aren't you being a little too arrogant? The Pope said. Jilin was shocked. He didn't expect this person to be so tactless and stupid. He was Aisha's friend. Jilin hesitated and said, "What did you just say?" The Pope tilted his head and looked at Jilin for a while. "Are you deaf?" Jilin was stunned for a moment. How did this person know? Then he realized that this person was scolding him and sneered. Jilin stomped his foot on the ground, and his figure instantly disappeared. With a rumbling sound, a huge pit appeared at the place where he originally stood. Jilin instantly appeared in front of the Pope and kicked him. Jilin's movements were so fast that no one could see his figure clearly. Even the Pope, one of the most powerful people in the world, couldn't react in time and was kicked hard. His whole body flew out and fell to the ground, rolling back continuously. The Pope steadied himself and half knelt on the ground. He was in a sorry state. How many years has it been since I last met an enemy? The Pope thought to himself as he resisted the urge to vomit blood. The Duke took a deep breath and held the hilt of his sword tightly with his right hand. Even the Pope, who was known as the most powerful human saint, couldn't resist a little. Jilin was also puzzled. In his mind, this kick should have made a hole in the Pope's stomach and sent his organs flying. He didn't die. It seemed that he was quite capable. Just as Jilin was about to step forward and kick him, a black light fell from the sky like a meteor and landed between the Pope and Jilin. Aisha finally caught up. This person is mine. I have a grudge against him, Aisha said to Jilin without turning her head. Ah. Then wouldn't it be more convenient for me to help you? Jilin felt a little strange. Because in his mind, Aisha didn't seem like a person who would kill her enemy with her own hands. She was more like the kind of woman who would do anything to achieve her goals. Jilin would believe that she would seek revenge for the smallest grievance. However, Jilin did not believe in such a straightforward and ordinary way of revenge. Aisha ignored Jilin and directly activated the forced teleportation array. A black hole appeared above the Pope's head, and a powerful suction force was about to suck him in. The Pope wanted to resist, but there was nothing he could do. He was instantly sucked in. Aisha nodded to Jilin as she saw that the matter was settled. She also jumped into the black hole. The black hole closed and disappeared. The Tiantai Square was completely silent. Jilin thought to himself, what is the meaning of this? What do you mean by nodding? I don't understand at all, okay? Jilin blinked his eyes and decided not to think about this unsolvable question. He looked at the Iron Blood King and said, "Give me Staya." The Iron Blood King slowly shook his head. Jilin took a deep breath and walked towards the Iron Blood King. All the soldiers gripped their weapons tightly, ready to attack at any moment. The soldiers were prepared to sacrifice themselves for a noble cause, but the Iron Blood King still didn't give the order to attack. Because a person passed by the Iron Blood King from behind and stood in front of him. This person's entire body was shrouded in a gray tattered cloak, so no one could see his appearance clearly. However, this person still attracted everyone's attention. It was related to his current actions. Everyone was curious as to what kind of person dared to stand in front of that monster after the Pope was kicked to the ground, protecting the Emperor behind him and blocking disaster in front of him. At the same time, it was also related to his clothes. His cloak wasn't like the Duke's cloak that could block the wind and snow. Instead, it was made of very thin cloth that fluttered crazily in the wind and snow. This kind of thing often appeared in the deserts of the Nanshin Kingdom because it could block the wind, sand, and scorching sun without increasing the body heat too much. However, it couldn't block the wind, snow, and cold. Therefore, this kind of thing could be said to be rare in the Snow-Wind Empire. After all, no one would go out with an extra blanket just because the weather was too cold at -40 or 50 degrees Celsius. That was extremely disrespectful to nature and human intelligence. This person who was stupid and awesome in the eyes of the people of the Snow-Wind Empire raised his fist and rushed towards Jilin. The cloak on his body was pulled straight in an instant, tightly sticking to his body, revealing an exaggerated muscular outline. Like a hot knife through butter, his momentum was magnificent and thunderous. Even the Duke was shocked by the shocking momentum, but Jilin didn't see him at all. He only stared at the Iron Blood King. He was arrogant and nothing more. But it was also reasonable. It was like a human squatting on the ground and staring at an ant in a colony. He wouldn't notice that another ant was running towards him. If that ant wanted to attract the human's attention, unless that ant was strong enough to lift the human up and throw him out. This was impossible. However, humans were better than other creatures because they had the possibility of making the impossible possible. The fist wrapped in bandages landed on Jilin's face. With a loud bang, smoke and dust rose up. Jilin flew out in the smoke, leaving a long trail behind him. This punch actually sent Jilin flying out of the mobile city's range. If it was a human, he would probably only be able to fall from a high altitude and shatter into pieces. At most, during the process of falling, he would reminisce about his ordinary life, but at the same time, there were still some highlights in his life. Other than that, there was nothing else he could do. But just as humans had advantages over ants, dragons also had advantages over humans. The most obvious one was that dragons could fly. Jilin only flipped his body in the air and stabilized his body with a flap of his wings. He raised his hand to rub his neck and tilted his head to look at the person below. He thought to himself that among the thousands of humans, there would always be a few who stood out from the masses. This human had successfully attracted Jilin's attention. That person pulled off his cloak with one hand and waved it in the wind and snow. He raised his head to look at Jilin and proudly shouted, "Don't look down on humans, you monster." Logically speaking, seeing this scene and hearing this sentence, the humans should be in high spirits and cheering. They should share the glory. But the people of the Snow-Wind Empire couldn't cheer. Everyone's expression was very strange. They couldn't tell if they were happy or sad. It was like a starving person eating a mouthful of half-cooked rice with sand. It was impossible to vomit. But it was very disgusting. Because that person's upper body was naked under the cloak. His pants were also very light martial arts clothes. The people of the Snow-Wind Empire had never seen someone who looked down on winter. Just by looking at him, a chill seemed to surge out from their bones, and their teeth couldn't help but tremble. This person is the legendary expert of the Nanshin Empire, the Emperor of Physique, Musin. There were also people who saw this outfit and not only felt cold, but also thought of the legends on the continent. Legend had it that Musin was a legendary expert who had reached the peak of physique training. He was always bare-chested and only wore light clothes. He used the harsh natural environment to train his physique to the greatest extent. Some people said that he once fought barehanded with a 9th-ranked King Kong beast and didn't fall into a disadvantageous position. In the end, he even won. This caused the huge King Kong beast to flee. Arrogant. Don't look down on humans. Jilin couldn't help but laugh. Then tell me, what do humans have that is worthy of my attention? Come down, my fists will make you understand. Muzin roared. Don't act rashly. This monster was caught off guard and took your punch. To think that he is unharmed. It looks like the Red Disaster lives up to its reputation, a 2-meter-tall bald man holding a large shield said with a frown as he walked over to Muzin's side. This bald man knew that even he, who was known for his defense, could not take Muzin's attack head-on. I know, Muzin said sullenly. This showed that he did not lose his cool or underestimate his opponent. How much strength did you use in that punch earlier? A red-clad girl asked as she silently appeared beside Muzin. I used all my strength in every punch, Muzin said. That's true. As the Duke looked at the two, he thought, to think that a legendary expert appeared. The Saimai Empire's legendary expert, Holy Wall Jiashu. The Divine Dragon Empire's legendary expert, the Red Dragon Knight, Flay. They are all famous people on the continent. Could this be His Majesty's and Beiluo's trump card? Is this enough to protect His Majesty? The Duke was still somewhat uncertain. Hence, he called over a soldier and asked, how much longer will it take to reach the bright snow divine weapon? We already used the entire mobile city's energy to charge it. The Church of Lights people already went over when the Pope arrived. It will take about 10 more minutes. 10 minutes. As the Duke looked at the 3 legendary experts before him, he felt somewhat more confident. That should be about right. Jilin slowly descended from the sky. Jiashu held up his large shield and stood in front of the two, waiting solemnly. The moment Jilin landed, Muzin passed by Jiashu and charged at Jilin. Don't! Jiashu shouted, wanting to step forward to stop Muzin. Normally, he should be the one to initiate the fight. However, Flay held him back. Just testing the waters. He won't die, Flay said seriously. Muzin punched Jilin's face again. This time, Jilin still did not dodge, nor did he defend. Instead, he took the punch head-on. This time, he slid back less than half a step. Jilin smiled faintly and raised his hand to return the punch. Muzin also took a punch from Jilin. This punch landed on Muzin's abdomen. Muzin immediately sucked in a sharp breath. He could not help covering his abdomen with both hands as he fell to his knees. He could not stop sucking in cold air. Hey, what's wrong? Didn't you say not to underestimate humans? Jilin mocked as he looked down at Muzin. Jiashu wanted to step forward, but Flay did not let go of him. This is just the beginning. Muzin took a few deep breaths and struggled to stand up. He looked at Jilin and said, that's right. Don't underestimate humans. Chapter 62. Jilin looked at Muzin, who was struggling to stand up, and could not help but find it funny. He was willing to spend some time with this slightly stronger human. Thus, Jilin gestured at Muzin with his finger and said, if you just stand there and don't move, it'll just be empty words. I know. Muzin roared and charged forward. He used all his strength to throw out another punch. It was as if the surrounding space was trembling because of this punch, and a loud sound was produced. The people with lower realms could not help but cover their ears tightly, but their bodies could naturally feel the tremors. Muzin's famous skill, the mountain quaking fist. His fist brought about intense tremors, and it could shatter mountains and rocks. Naturally, it could also shatter enemies. Moreover, those who cultivated it to the highest level could even shake mountains. Jilin was still unmoved by this terrifying punch. He didn't even try to dodge it. Jilin took this punch, and his upper body could not help but lean back. However, his feet were still firmly nailed to the ground as if they were rooted to the ground. Not bad, Jilin praised. Then, he threw out a punch. Muzin's eyes bulged, and his body slid back. However, after sliding for 2 steps, he was stopped by Muzin. Although he looked much better now, Muzin's injuries were much more than much. That's all, Muzin said. A human's mouth. Jilin could not help but shake his head. Then, he looked at Muzin seriously and said, is this the talent of your race? No matter how big the difference in strength is, you will never be at a disadvantage when it comes to words. Regardless of whether it's a so-called legendary powerhouse or an ordinary person, there are no exceptions. Muzin ignored him. His body glowed with a golden light, and a heavy and domineering aura spread out. It was Muzin's self-created technique, the Emperor Body Technique. Ha! Muzin turned into a golden light and punched Jilin's abdomen with the tip of his fist. Jilin took half a step back with one foot. Not bad, Jilin said as he punched. This time, Muexian also took half a step back with one foot. It did not matter whether he was forcing himself or not. Then, Muexian's fists turned into a storm and attacked Jilin's body like raging waves. The crowd could not see Muzin's hands at all. They could only see countless rays of golden light. Jilin followed Muzin's rhythm and attacked him. Not one punch more, not one punch less. Furthermore, he managed to avoid Muzin's fists with every punch. The attacks between the two were as intense as a tsunami. With the two of them as the center, a wild hurricane was set off. What do you mean by going all out with every punch? Aren't you holding back? Flay could not help but ridicule. No, each of Muzin's punches is above Muzin's full strength, Jiaxiu said in a deep voice as he watched the two fighting. Fry curled her lips and did not say anything else. How could she not see through this? It was just that the current atmosphere was too heavy, and he couldn't help but want to say something. The fight between the two made her a little nervous. Jiaxiu's mood wasn't as heavy as Flay's. He just stared at the two of them without blinking, as if he was afraid to miss any scene. That was the enemy's information that Muzin had risked his life to obtain. Every punch hit the flesh. There was no hiding, no dodging, no defending. They would fight to the death. A black hole quietly opened up above the snowy plains. The Pope and Aisha landed on the snowy ground one after another. They looked at each other and did not say anything for a long time. Only when the never-ending snowstorm of the Snow-Wind Empire passed between the two of them and blew at their clothes, did the scene seem more vivid. Otherwise, the onlookers would think that the two of them were statues standing there. A loud sound came from the moving city in the distance. Smoke and dust rose. That was the punch that Muzin had used to send Jilin flying. The Pope looked over and finally took the lead to break the silence. I have to go. Don't stop me. When this matter is over, I can accompany you for a few days. Be good and move aside. Scram. Aisha frowned and said coldly when she heard the Pope's ambiguous tone. Hey, why are you so stubborn? If you continue to be like this, I will be serious. Hurry up and move aside. The Pope took out his staff. However, anyone could tell that he was trying to put up a strong front. Aisha smiled contemptuously and said, You can try. At the same time, a fist-sized black crystal fell into Aisha's hand. Is there a need to go to this extent? The Pope said softly. He seemed to be a little weak. This was because he recognized that crystal. It could be said to be Aisha's treasure. Back then, in order to help Aisha make this work, he had spent a lot of effort and suffered a lot. Thinking about it now, he still felt that the past was unbearable, therefore, he was very clear about the effects of this item. This work was called Dark Crystal Maze. It was Aisha's most powerful trapping method. Others might not know, but if it was to trap him, it would not be a problem for him to be trapped for 2 hours. In the past, the Pope was naturally not afraid. Even if Aisha trapped him for 2 years, it would be fine. He might even be able to rely on Aisha. However, he could not do that now. It was obvious that the other side had started fighting. He was an extremely important part of the plan. He could not let anything happen to him. If he was really trapped by Aisha for 2 hours, everything would be over. The Pope's eyes rolled quickly. Suddenly, he covered his chest with his hands and spat out a mouthful of blood. A large patch of red appeared on the white snow. The Pope fell to the ground. His face was frighteningly pale. He could not catch his breath and was panting non-stop. What's wrong with you? Aisha asked coldly with her arms crossed. Her eyes narrowed slightly. She thought to herself, how dare he use such a childish trick? Did he really think that I would fall for it? This monster is really strong. I didn't expect, just one kick, to be so heavily injured. The Pope stuttered. As he spoke, he spat out 2 more mouthfuls of blood. His breath was weak. Finally, he fell to the ground. Hey! Hey, stop pretending. You know that I won't fall for it. Since you know that the enemy is strong and invincible, don't ask for more trouble. Can't you hear me talking to you? Stop pretending. It's useless. I won't let you go. Hey, don't tell me you really didn't defend yourself. Aisha looked at the Pope lying there motionlessly. She could not help but doubt her judgment. She was very clear about Jilin's strength. If the Pope really did not defend himself, he would have been kicked by Jilin. Then, it would be very normal for him to be kicked to death. Even if the Pope was a legendary powerhouse, he was still a weak mage. He was not like Musin who could fight with Jilin. Aisha slowly walked forward and carefully grabbed the Pope's wrist. It was different from what she remembered. She felt cold when she touched it. Aisha instantly knew that the Pope's injury was real. He really needed to lie down, but not in the snow. Actually, I defended myself. But, I couldn't block it all. The Pope looked at Aisha and said weakly. What are you laughing at? Aisha frowned. I didn't expect that before I die. I would be with you. Before this was something that I never even dreamed of. It's really unpredictable. Now, I'm sure. I'm really favored by the God of Light. Thank you, God of Light, for letting you stay by my side in the end. Aisha, I've always wanted to tell you. You are the light that the God of Light has given me. The Pope tried hard to say something like his last words. It was as if he would take his last breath at any time. Aisha's eyes were covered with a layer of mist. She gently pulled the Pope into her arms. Don't say any more. You won't die. Also, I'm here now. It has nothing to do with your God of Light. The Pope reached out with difficulty and hugged Aisha's waist. He buried his face in Aisha's soft chest and rubbed it twice. He let out an extremely reluctant sigh. I'm sorry. The Pope said with a trembling voice. He held Aisha's hands even more tightly. An extremely dazzling white magic circle instantly opened up with the Pope as the center. Aisha was hugged by the Pope so naturally, she could not react. She was enveloped by this magic circle. Holy cage. Anyone who was enveloped by the holy light of this magic circle was like a bird in a cage. In here, the witch's power will be suppressed to the greatest extent. You don't have to struggle. When the time is up, it will dissipate. The Pope said softly and stood up at the same time. Aisha did not show any anger at being deceived. She just looked at the Pope seriously and said, your injuries are really serious. You really can't beat him. What she meant was that the situation was already very obvious. The Pope and the legendary masters were just foolishly digging their own graves. Humans, there are also people who do things even though they know it's impossible. This way of living is either extremely stupid or forced. You have other choices. The Pope smiled and shook his head. I do as I wish. I am who I am. Why? Why don't you change your mind when you know the result will not be good? Is this really what you want? Aisha asked. The Pope looked at Aisha again and sighed. Then, he simply turned around and walked away. He did not look back and said, how can everything be as you wish? I just want to have a clear conscience. Aisha lowered her head as if giving up. There was no common ground between people who walked different paths. She had already given up on persuading the Pope. You will regret it. Aisha whispered. When I lied to you, I actually already regretted it. The Pope said. You lied to me just now? Aisha asked. Only the fact that I'm about to die was a lie. The Pope said. Then I'm really sorry. Aisha said. What do you mean? The Pope did not stop walking and kept walking away. Just now, I was lying to you. Aisha's voice sounded, but it no longer came from behind the Pope. The Pope, who had not stopped walking, suddenly froze on the spot. He stared at the figure of Aisha, who slowly appeared outside the magic circle. The Pope turned around abruptly. Aisha, who was sitting on the ground, had unknowingly turned into a wooden doll. The Pope slowly turned around and looked at Aisha, who was outside the magic circle. He could not help but lower his head and touch his forehead. He said softly, "Damn." Chapter 63. The Pope's mood was as messy as a snowflake in the wind. The Pope lowered his head and cursed, then angrily pointed his trembling finger at Aisha, unable to speak for a long time. You, what about me?" Aisha was calm and looked at the Pope from the corner of her eyes. "You treacherous woman." The Pope shouted in an exaggerated tone, full of grievance. It was as if he had never thought of deceiving Aisha, but Aisha had simply deceived him. Aisha was naturally unmoved. This kind of thing that the whole world knows, why do you need to shout it out so loudly? You're too stupid. Aisha mocked. You're a light believer who believes in honesty every day, and you actually want to deceive a witch who specializes in bewitching people. This is really showing off your slight skill in front of an expert. I really don't know what you're thinking. You're using your weakness to attack my strength. Are you looking down on me? How could I look down on you? The Pope muttered softly. I just heard that a woman in love will become stupid, so I wanted to try. You wanted to see if you could deceive me? Aisha said. No, I wanted to see if you have fallen in love with me. The Pope said. And the result? It doesn't seem to be good? Can it be, even if my IQ is lower, it's still higher than yours? Aisha now had the time and the mood to joke. This was the unique calmness of someone who thought that she had the situation under control. No, someone told me that a woman in love has 0 IQ. The Pope stubbornly said. Didn't that person tell you that a man in love has a negative IQ? Aisha said. The Pope suddenly fell into silence, frowning. He seriously pondered. There really wasn't such a sentence. But there seemed to be another sentence after that. What was it? Aisha looked at the Pope, who was in deep thought and couldn't help but shake her head. This person was so unpredictable, his thoughts were so drifting. Regardless of the occasion, regardless of the time. If you don't stop him, his thoughts will definitely drift to the higher ethereal realm, and definitely won't come back for a while. In the past, this would have been a headache, but now, it was exactly what Aisha wanted. Just as the pontiff was thinking about how he could beat Lord up without making him retaliate, 2 loud explosions rang out from the moving city. Then, there was silence. Then, an endless series of explosions came crashing down like an explosion. The Pope suddenly became alert. His first thought was not to regret for wasting time, but to think of the time many years ago when he was in the endless forest with Aisha. At that time, Aisha always told herself that she had to change her habit of being absent-minded. Otherwise, sooner or later, she would make a mistake because of this shortcoming. When that time came, she would regret it for the rest of her life. But he had lived. The Pope's. They were all trivial matters that could not be taken into account. Be it the Empire or the Church of Light. So what if he, the Pope, did not manage the religious affairs for decades? People in the religion thought that although he was wandering outside, he had always been concerned about the religion and knew it like the back of his hand. He really did not know what those people were thinking. Maybe they used the name of the God of Light to deceive people. After deceiving so many people, they could easily deceive him. I've been in charge of the Pope's affairs for decades, so I don't know anything about religion. Yet, none of them dared to even think about the possibility of it happening. Not a single one of them doubted that I've been such a hands-off leader. How laughable. Thinking of this, the Pope could not help but chuckle. I really don't know how someone like you became the Pope. Aisha's voice was full of doubt. The Pope woke up again. Then, he found that he was distracted again. Damn, why is it that the more dangerous it is, the easier it is to be distracted? The Pope thought. The Pope began to walk towards Aisha, step by step. Aisha put away her playful mood and looked at the Pope seriously. No matter what, she could not let the Pope rush into that stormy battlefield. The bodies of mages were always weak. Stop. You can't go any further. Aisha clenched the crystal maze, ready to activate it at any time. However, the Pope was not moved at all. He continued to walk forward at the same pace. He looked at Aisha and said, "It's not your style to threaten someone like that. Under normal circumstances, you would have used the crystal maze to trap me without saying anything. You wouldn't have said so much to me and added so many variables for no reason. This is really not like you." So? Aisha tilted her head and asked. "I'm guessing that the crystal in your hand is a fake. The real crystal maze should have been used by you long ago. You're just bluffing." The Pope walked out of the bright magic circle and stood in front of Aisha. His holy robes and perfect face made him look like a god who had walked out of the divine realm of light. Elsa looked at the Pope with a conflicted expression. She wanted to say something, but she stopped. The Pope raised his hand to pat Aisha's head, but Aisha simply waved away his hand. The Pope sighed, thinking to himself that this should be the real thing. Thus, the Pope said to Aisha seriously, "Don't worry. To be honest, after living for so many years, I'm a little tired of living. There aren't many things in this world that can surprise me. Now that such a powerful creature has suddenly appeared, I must go and take a look. No need to flatter me. You just can't let go of those so-called sentient beings." Aisha exposed him. The Pope raised his hand and rubbed his head. He stopped joking and said slowly, "It's fine. This time, we've made ample preparations. The lineup is unprecedentedly strong. Many empires have worked together, and many legends have come. Saimai Empire's Holy Wall, Jiashu. Divine Dragon Empire's Red Dragon, Flay. Southern Exian Empire's Body Monarch, Musin. Middle Empire's Sword Saint, Gai Mingyue. With me, we are confident of fighting against any enemy. Furthermore, the Snow Wind Empire also has a backup plan. We might not lose. You will die," Aisha said with certainty. The Pope was rendered speechless by Aisha's words. "Your cultivation talent is excellent. In the long history of witches, you are also an unparalleled genius. You should have entered the legendary stage long ago. However, you have been trying to overthrow the Church of Light all these years, running all over the continent. Hence, the many mysteries of the legendary stage are not something you can understand," the Pope said. "Even so, you will still die. Jilin is at least a god. Just his realm alone is above yours. Furthermore, humans have always been one whole realm above magical beasts before they can fight on equal terms," Aisha said. "If it is as you say, then I can die without regrets." The Pope took 2 steps and passed by Aisha, arriving behind Aisha. His body started to glow from the inside out. Eventually, his entire body turned into a ball of light. Then, the ball of light scattered into countless spots of light and flew in the direction of the mobile city. This was the Pope's trump card for escaping, turning into light and creating thousands of clones. Who could catch light? Who could hurt light? This was the Pope showing his trump card to Aisha. He hoped that Aisha would have more confidence in him and worry less. The crystal in Aisha's hand slowly started to glow. However, it eventually returned to normal. "Since you are not afraid of death and insist on going, I will not stop you. However, I will do my best to protect you and try not to let you die." Aisha thought to herself. The thunderous sounds created by Jilin and Musin's attacks slowly became softer. This was a sign that one of them was starting to become weak. The rain had just stopped. The 2 figures appeared in front of everyone. Jilin did not look any different from before. No one dared to believe that he had just experienced such an intense battle. As for Musin, it was obvious that he was in a terrible state. There was not a single part of his upper body that was undamaged. There was not a single bone that was not broken. His arms were strangely bent outwards. His chest had completely caved in. No one could bear to look at his face. He really looked like an ordinary person who had been run over by a carriage. Jilin smiled and said, "Don't underestimate humans." Muzin kept gasping for breath, but he couldn't say a word. Jiashu held his shield and began to walk forward. Every step was extremely heavy. This time, Flay did not stop him. Jilin walked towards Muzin. He looked at this human who had given him a chance to exercise. This human was not bad. His body was even sturdier than a mountain rock. He did not know what kind of training he had gone through to be able to reach this stage with a mortal body. However, in front of him, what was the difference between a mountain rock and a body of flesh and blood? Jilin began to walk towards Muzin. Every step he took seemed to be stepping on everyone's hearts. Were they going to witness the fall of a legend today? Jiashu was already prepared to receive the attack. Although he did not have enough information, he could only brace himself. It was all Muzin's fault. He did not know how to change his attack methods. Jiashu grumbled in his heart. Suddenly, a cold light appeared between heaven and earth. It instantly cut through space and landed on Jilin's arm. The moment everyone saw the sword light, they knew that the temperature of the sword light was even colder than the wind and snow of the Snow Wind Empire. This was because it was an extremely powerful sword light. A long-haired man dressed in simple clothes quietly appeared between Jilin and Muzin. He slowly sheathed his sword. Sword Saint of the Middle Empire, Gai Mingyue. Half of Jilin's right arm had been cut off. His bones were completely broken, and only the flesh on the inside was still connected. Jilin was stunned for a few seconds before he realized what had happened. He looked at Gai Mingyue in disbelief and then looked at his miserable right arm. This human actually dared to injure him to this extent. Damn it! This was unforgivable. Jilin let out a cruel sneer. At the same time, he tore off his right arm and threw it on the ground. He burned it with his dragon flames. Scales began to appear on his body. His eyes shone with a golden light. A new right arm instantly stretched out from where his arm had been cut off. Jilin coldly looked at all the humans. The second rule of the Dragon Clan stated that if a dragon bled, it must pay with its life. Chapter 64. When the golden light in Jilin's eyes burst out, the entire area within a kilometer of the mobile city seemed to have changed from winter to summer. The world outside was still filled with heavy snow, and the cold wind was still whistling like a knife. However, not even a snowflake or a wisp of cold wind could float into this area. This was the power of a dragon. Enough to stand shoulder to shoulder with the gods, leaving humans in the dust. No human dared to act rashly. Jilin's body began to gradually turn red, and the muscles all over his body expanded like air. Flames spurted out from the pores all over Jilin's body, and these flames completely wrapped Jilin, forming a fireball as tall as a person. Then, this fireball suddenly became huge, occupying a large part of the mobile city platform. The fireball suddenly became bigger, and at the same time, it also meant that the burning area suddenly increased. Many humans simply couldn't dodge in time and were instantly enveloped by the flames. They didn't even have time to scream before they quietly disappeared. It was as if these people didn't exist in the first place. Jiashu's expression suddenly changed. He clenched the giant shield in his hand and stared at the huge fireball in front of him that was like the sun descending to the world. Such a monster who disregarded human life, death was not to be regretted. A pair of giant wings stretched out from the flames and suddenly spread out, dispersing the raging flames. Jilin returned to his long-lost dragon form and couldn't help but roar to the sky. He stretched his body to his heart's content, just like a human doing a big stretch. This feeling of unlocking the long shackles of one's body was indeed fascinating. The legendary red megalosaurus appeared in the world, occupying the greatest human city, showing its existence to the world as if no one else was around. His voice was majestic and heavy, thousands of times louder than the largest war horn of mankind. It was like the magnificent holy sound in the divine kingdom, and also like the roar of the devil in the deepest part of hell. Just by showing its true body, it interrupted the never-ending snowstorm of the Snow Wind Empire. Under the feet of this creature, humans were naturally in danger. As for whether it would shatter, of course, it depended on Jilin's mood and luck. A creature that only existed in legends and could stand shoulder to shoulder with the gods suddenly appeared in front of them. Naturally, everyone present was so shocked that they lost their ability to move and think. Although that was the case, it was just as Jilin thought. There would always be one or two unique existences among the human population that was as numerous as the sand in the sea. While everyone else was stunned, the Duke quickly regained his composure and shouted, "Protect His Majesty." The Duke's voice reached the ears of the soldiers, causing them to tremble. Years of training had given the soldiers an instinctive response to military orders, not to mention an order as correct and deserving as "Protect His Majesty." The warriors moved instinctively, moving closer to the Iron Blood King at an unprecedented speed. In an instant, countless huge shields were set up in front of the Iron Blood King, forming an indestructible steel wall. The magicians immediately cast their most powerful instantaneous defensive spells. Behind the huge shields, layers of magic barriers were unfolded. However, the mages didn't have the slightest intention of stopping. They began to chant incantations, wanting to release even more powerful and advanced defensive magic. They wanted to add even more protection for their majesty, even if it was just a little bit more. More soldiers stood in front of the huge shields, holding their weapons and pointing them at Jilin. They formed a dense human wall with their flesh and blood, bravely guarding their emperor. Compared to the huge shields and magic barriers, this thick human wall was definitely more reassuring and more terrifying. Because, forming this human wall, every one of them was a warrior, a hero. When the country was on the brink of life and death, they stepped forward bravely. How could one avoid disaster and fortune? Even if, in the eyes of the Megalosaurus, this was not worth mentioning, these warriors still chose to do so, doing their best and leaving the rest to fate. Even a legendary powerhouse could not help but be moved. The Duke was very satisfied with the actions of his warriors, and his heart calmed down. He thought to himself, this formation can at least buy His Majesty 3 to 4 seconds, right? Then the Duke stared at Beiluo, thinking to himself, didn't you say that you have a way to ensure His Majesty's safety? Why aren't you using it? What are you waiting for? But facing the Duke's gaze, Beiluo was unmoved, and still stood steadily beside the equally calm Iron Blood King. Even in such a critical moment, the Duke could not help but think, His Majesty is indeed His Majesty, just this calmness in the face of danger is something I can never catch up to. If I had known earlier, this would be my ability to make a living. But, Beiluo, why are you pretending to be calm here? If anything happens to His Majesty, can you bear the responsibility? Just as the Duke was glaring at Beiluo, spots of light rushed over from afar, landing on the platform to form a ball of light. The Pope walked out of the light, and looked at the human wall formed by the warriors, as well as the fearless expressions on their faces. He could not help but nod in praise. How can everything be as you wish, as long as you have a clear conscience? My path is not lonely. Since when did your path become like this? The last time I saw you, didn't you say that you were going to turn into light and bless all living beings? Fry saw that the Pope had finally arrived, and could not help but mock him. You're late, said Gaimenue. How can that be? I was just in time, said the Pope. Why were you gone for so long? Although Aisha has been famous for many years, she has never entered the legendary realm. Logically speaking, she should not have been able to stop you, said Fry. Well, the Pope was about to explain himself. You all seem to be very relaxed. Jilin saw that these ignorant ants were ignoring him and chatting with him, and could not help but feel even more furious. He immediately flapped his wings. A hurricane appeared between heaven and earth. It swept towards the humans. The legendary experts chatted, but their gazes never left Jilin, not even a little bit. Facing Jilin, no one dared to be careless, because they might not even know how they died. The hurricane Jilin created was like the true power of heaven and earth, and it whistled towards the humans. Even the slightest contact could easily tear through steel. Guy Manuel slammed his shield on the ground. He prayed silently in his heart. May God's glory protect the people. The people will also be grateful for God's grace and obey God's oracle. Descend, holy wall. Guy Manuel's shield became incomparably huge and appeared in the form of light. A huge shield of light appeared in front of Jilin, and it was even bigger than Jilin. It completely blocked the hurricane and protected all the humans. The hurricane hit the shield of light, and the impact caused the moving city and the ground below to tremble uncontrollably. Guy Manuel could not help but slide back slightly. Retreat quickly, don't make unnecessary sacrifices, Guy Manuel shouted. This was for the people of the Snow Wind Empire. Let Musin stand up. This was for the Pope. The Pope raised his hand and cast holy healing, and holy light enveloped Musin. Musin began to recover at a speed visible to the naked eye. I'll speak, said the Pope. What? Guy Manuel replied. You're from the Church of Light? Asked the Pope. Guy Manuel could not help but glance at his holy wall. That's right. Do you know that I'm the Pope? Asked the Pope. Yes. Then why don't you speak to me more politely? Questioned the Pope. The veins on Guy Manuel's bald head could not help but twitch. It was not only because of the pressure from Jilin, but also because of the Pope's anger. Guy Manuel thought to himself, what time is this? I'm still in the mood to talk to you. If it were not for the fact that he could not free his hands, he would have punched him. Although he had heard from the people in the church that the Pope was a little unreliable, Guy Manuel had never believed it. Before this, in his mind, the Pope had always been an elusive and mysterious expert. But now, it seemed that the Pope lived up to his reputation. Although he had a lot to say, Guy Manuel's personality dictated that he just gritted his teeth and did not say anything. You're finally here, Musin sat up and said to the Pope. Don't be so troublesome. You still have to heal. Anyway, you're all going to die, Jilin said fiercely. Maybe we will die, but we will not wait for death, said Guy Manuel. Jilin reached out and clenched his fist, breaking the light shield cleanly. A futile struggle, said Jilin. People know that they will die one day from the moment they know the concept of death. But people are still working hard to live. This is not a futile struggle. This is living in the face of death. This is the love of life, Guy Manuel said seriously. Jiaxiu defended himself seriously. He had expected the holy wall to be destroyed. With such a large defensive area, it would have been difficult for the weaker side to break through. Ha 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 ha, well said. You're just afraid of death. Since you don't dare to die, you can only live helplessly, said Jilin. Guy Manuel pointed to the battlefield full of corpses and said, Who are you saying is afraid of death? Even Jilin was speechless at this time. Guy Manuel's words were really invulnerable. Guy Manuel's words were true because countless dwarves and human warriors sacrificed their lives to make the most solid footnotes for his words. So that's how it is. If life is meaningless, then it's not strange to use it to do meaningless things. Jilin seemed to have understood something and muttered to himself. Guy Manuel did not think that was what he meant. But forget it, there was no need to talk about human life with a dragon. As expected of the Pope, said Musin as he stood up and jumped twice. Of course, said the Pope calmly. But it was this calmness that made others feel like he was showing off. Then let's begin. Flay saw that Musin had recovered and immediately cast a fireball that exceeded the limits of a human. It was considered the start of the team battle. The fireball quickly flew toward Jilin with astonishing momentum. But it did not go far before it automatically dissipated into the air, disappearing without a trace. Even Jilin felt that it was a little strange. All the legendary powerhouses looked at Flay in astonishment. All fire-type attacks were ineffective against the Red Calamity. This should have been something that was already known, right? Flay stretched out her finger and scratched her forehead. she said softly. I just wanted to try. The scene became very awkward. Chapter 65. Flay was a legendary expert, and the name of the Red Dragon resounded throughout the continent. Her specialty, and the ultimate skill that made her famous, was naturally her unparalleled fire magic. As the continent's strongest fire mage, when she suddenly heard that there was something that could completely nullify the fire magic that she was so proud of, she naturally did not believe it and wanted to personally test it. Was it really nullified, or was the fire mage's level too low? With this, Flay understood that it really did not work. Ever since she came into contact with magic, this had never happened before. Although she did not show it on her face, a layer of haze had already covered Flay's heart. A bad premonition appeared in her heart. Since fire magic really doesn't work, then let's change it. Realm of Extreme Frost. Flay actually used an ice-forbidden spell. Beiluo frowned slightly, thinking that a legendary expert was really unimaginable. She could actually use two opposing types of magic at the same time, and both of them had reached the level of a forbidden spell. The Duke had already walked to the back of the shield formation and stood beside the Iron Blood King. Beiluo's shocked expression naturally did not escape his eyes. He thought that Musa was born poor and did not have much experience. Compared to a noble like him, Musa was still lacking. Powerful, the Iron Blood King said. Your Majesty is right. It really widened my horizons. The Duke said. Extreme Frost could greatly slow down a legendary expert's movements, and it could directly freeze an enemy below the platinum rank. If it was effective against Jilin, this would be a great opportunity. Muzin's legs trembled slightly, and he had already dashed out. Golden light bloomed around his body, and he had actually directly activated the Emperor Body's technique. The Pope raised his scepter and cast an amplification spell on Muzin, the light god's protection. It could clearly increase a legendary expert's strength in all aspects. Muzin jumped 5 meters into the air, and Jiashu took the opportunity to walk below him and raise his shield. Muzin landed and stepped on the huge shield. Jiashu activated the repel skill. It could forcefully push away the enemy in front of the shield. Muzin used this powerful repelling force to jump up with all his strength, turning into a golden light that was faster than light. He charged toward Jilin and once again swung his fist with all his strength. This time, he was 100 times more confident, because this time, it was not just his strength. This punch gathered the strength of many legendary experts, and it could be said that it was the strongest punch that a human could throw. There was no reason for him to lose. This punch swung in the air, the clouds dissipated. He actually managed to create a clear blue sky and a bright sun. This punch, it was too fast, too strong. It changed the weather of the Snow Wind Empire. It not Muzin's a light, as not a god, not a mage, and not a god a mage. Human beings were always like this. They were always able to deduce some profound meaning that was in line with their current state of mind from unrelated and meaningless matters. Therefore, there were always inexplicable misunderstandings between humans. Fortunately, this misunderstanding didn't last long. That was because Muzin's golden light left quickly and came back even faster. Muzin's speed was so fast that no one could see him clearly. In their eyes, he had already turned into an extremely thin ray of light that flashed and disappeared. However, Jilin could see him clearly, and he was faster than him. Jilin quietly watched the humans below mess around. He watched them perform acrobatics and watched a person jump up and charge toward him. Jilin raised his hand and threw a punch downward. The huge dragon claw clenched into a fist, which was the size of a house. With such speed, humans naturally could not match it. It could be said that Muzin and Jilin had exchanged a punch, but it could also be said that they did not. That was because he had indeed exchanged punches with Jilin, but he did not even last for a moment. In the eyes of others, Muzin had only flashed up in an instant, parting the clouds to see the blue sky. Then, he flashed back and crashed through the moving city. However, no one knew how many floors he had crashed through and whether he had reached the ground. If it were not for the huge pit on the ground and the unnatural clear sky in the sky, the Duke would have thought that he had seen wrongly. It was as if Musin had not gone up at all. Musin half knelt on the ground and raised his head to look at the majestic megalosaurus. He spat out a mouthful of rock shards. He thought that if it were not for the Pope's support, he would not have been able to get up after taking this punch. Jilin slowly retracted his fist. To him, it was as easy and natural as a human swatting away a mosquito that could only fly in a straight line. At this moment, a crack suddenly appeared in the space beside Jilin's hand. It was spatial magic, spatial teleportation. It wasn't a high-level spell, but a basic spatial spell. However, those who could use spatial spells were 1 in a million. How many types of magic can Flay use? This is too ridiculous. The Duke could not help but cry out. 10,000 types, Pats. Return to the same place. Vice versa, the Iron Blood King said. Is this the realm of a legendary expert? Beiluo asked. The Iron Blood King nodded slightly. Grand Secretary Beiluo sighed and said, I look up to a high mountain. Although I cannot reach it, I yearn for it. The Iron Blood King smiled and said, That's right. Everyone was like that. The Duke thought to himself, What are you talking about? The space tunnel opened, and Gai Mingyue flashed out. She pulled out the sword that she had been accumulating power for a long time. Her target was still Jilin's arm. A cold light flashed, and it was bone-piercing. The sharpness was unparalleled. No one knew how such a short sword could produce such a long and powerful slash. It was only now that people believed that the legend of the Middle Empire's sword Saint Gai Mingyue, who once used her sword to slash open the palace gate of the Middle Empire's palace, was true. The sword light was too dazzling, but Jilin did not care. He thought, You want to slash my arm again? According to the words Staya had taught him, this was really unbearable. But even so, Jilin did not think of avoiding the sharpness. He slowly retracted his arm and suddenly swung it horizontally. He actually wanted to take on Gai Mingyue's shocking sword head-on. The huge dragon arm was like a moving city wall. It smashed towards Gai Mingyue from all directions. Such an astonishing momentum could not shake the sword saint in the slightest. The sword light did not change in the slightest because he believed that no matter what was blocking his sword, it would be cut by him. Even the endless sky would be cut open by him one day, let alone this arm that was only made of flesh and blood. This was the confidence of the Middle Empire. No, this was the confidence of the strongest swordsman in the human world. This was the arrogance that had settled down in the past when he dared to confront the unfathomable royal family of the Middle Empire with a single sword. He had fought for 3,000 miles. One sword was like 1,000,000 soldiers. One sword dance shook the 4 directions. The spectators were as dejected as the mountains. The heavens and earth bowed for a long time. Who in the world could block this sword? The sword saint's sword light and sword will had reached its peak. This sentence was the portrayal of his heart at this moment. But, just as people said, the objective things in the world would not change with human will. Humans had their limits. There would always be things that no matter how hard they tried, they would not be able to do anything about it. And there were countless such things in the world. Even if the sword saint's swordsmanship was unparalleled, he was still human. The sword light that could lower the heavens and earth began to crumble the moment it came into contact with Jilin's scales. The sword saint only felt that his sword-wielding arms were broken, but his hands still held on tightly to his sword instinctively. The sword saint was swept away. He was shot down from the sky by Jilin. In the nick of time, the Pope cast a buff spell on the sword saint before he was hurt. Before this, the Gai Mingyue had always rejected the Pope's buff spells. Because he only believed in his sword, the sword saint was caught by Musin and placed on the ground. He struggled to get up. Even though he was heavily injured, he immediately felt that his hand was lighter. He looked at his sword. His eyes were about to pop out of their sockets. He was shocked. It was the famous sword that had accompanied him for half of his life and killed countless enemies, flowing light. There was actually a hole in it. At this moment, the Sword Saint's sword heart was almost shattered. He looked at the hole in his sword and did not know what to do. The Pope and the others also felt very troubled. They looked at the Sword Saint's expression as if his beloved woman had died. They were afraid that he would not even care about Jilin and sacrifice himself for his sword. Jilin looked at the Sword Saint's expression and felt very satisfied. He vaguely felt that he had taken his revenge. The guy Mingyue was a little dazed. He never thought that the sword he was so confident in would be shattered so forcefully. "That's too unsightly, Lord Sword Saint," Muzin shouted. "You're actually swayed by something that should be expected. You're not worthy of the name Sword Saint." The guy Mingyue was startled. "Look at the enemy in front of you clearly. He's not someone that any human can defeat." "That's why we're gathered here," Flay said. The guy Mingyue was a top-notch expert after all. His willpower was far stronger than ordinary people. He looked at Jilin's figure and sighed in his heart. He did not have the right to be arrogant in front of this creature. The Sword Saint slowly straightened his back and placed flowing light in front of him. He said softly, "Excuse me, everyone." Everyone smiled knowingly and did not say anything. "Although this goes against the way of the sword, I still have to say it. Let's attack together," the Sword Saint said. "All right." The Emperor of Physique raised his fist in front of his chest. "That's how it should be," Jiashu said. The Pope looked at the guy Mingyue, who quickly composed himself. He thought to himself, "Lord Sword Saint is really strong." He raised his hand and cast a buffing spell on the Sword Saint. The Sword Saint gripped his sword uncomfortably, but he did not refuse. Jiashu looked up at Jilin and thought to himself, "This world is really full of disasters." He then looked at the Sword Saint, who had become more determined. He thought about how the Sword Saint's stunning sword had been forcefully defeated. He could not help but say, "Why do humans have to be strong? It's because they can't survive without being strong. Why do humans have to be united? It's because there's an obstacle that one person can't overcome no matter what. Does that mean that, how many virtues do humans have? How many cruelties do humans have in this world?" When Jilin heard this, he could not help but laugh wildly. "No, don't think too highly of yourself, human. This world is equal to all living things. It equally bestows sunlight, rain, dew, spring flowers, autumn moon, summer, and winter snow to all living things. It is not an enemy of life, but it is also not a friend of life. It is impartial and extremely fair. It is cruel to humans. It's just the rest of the humans." Jiashu opened his mouth, but no words came out. The other experts were thoughtful. The Pope said, "Don't talk about these useless things." Chapter 66. When the legendary experts heard the Pope's words, they couldn't help but feel strange. How is this useless? Before a battle, they naturally had to strengthen their beliefs. If they had doubts about their own beliefs and couldn't be sure that what they were doing was correct, how could they unleash their full strength? No matter what, humans are always so difficult. What's the meaning of human life? Should humans continue to exist in this world? Now, only now, what we should do is undoubtedly defeat it. The Pope pointed at Jilin with his staff. "What do you mean by being cruel to humans?" "It's the other humans." "What a joke. You've already caused so many innocent humans to lose their lives for no reason. How can you say such words? You've really learned the essence of how shameless humans are. Humans are really a degenerate race. They're always used to putting aside problems that they can't solve. However, this kind of thing is like death. You can temporarily not think about it, but you can't get rid of it." Jilin laughed. "Also, I'm willing to respect all lives as long as you don't block my path." "What's your goal?" Muzin asked. "Give Staya to me, and I won't interfere in this playful war between you and the dwarves," Jilin said. "No!" Jiashu and the Pope said in unison. Staya had the Holy Book of Light. Even if this thing was left outside for a day, it was enough to make everyone in the Church of Light anxious. Moreover, just as the Pope had said, Staya was the saint of the Church. If she was taken away just like that, where would the Church of Light's dignity go? How would they be able to establish themselves in the continent? Did you hear that? Flay shrugged her shoulders at Jilin. Jilin had lived in the human world for a long time. He was very clear about the meaning behind this playful action. Since that was the case, there was nothing more to say. Jilin stretched out his finger and poked Flay without warning. It was as fast as lightning. If it was Guy Mingyua, she might be able to block it. If it was Musin, he might be able to dodge it. Flay definitely wouldn't be able to escape. That was what everyone thought. However, Flay instantly disappeared from where she stood and suddenly reappeared in the distance. This was the first time Jilin's attack had missed. Teleport. Instantaneous teleportation. Don't underestimate mages, Fry said. However, he did not know if she was talking to Jilin or the other legend rank experts. Jilin raised his hand and swung it down again. He thought to himself, I don't believe that you can keep dodging. Flay hastily activated her teleportation skill. Although nothing could be seen from her expression, only she knew how much effort she had put into it. She could only activate this skill a few times. Fortunately, her companions were all reliable people. Jiashu predicted Jilin's attack and raised his shield to block it. An indescribably huge impact came, and Jiashu, who was 2 meters tall and muscular, was sent flying backward like a cannonball until he smashed into the wall of the moving city. But no matter how pathetic the situation looked, he still managed to block it. Jilin looked at Jiashu and flicked his finger. Sparks flew. It was like a swordsman sharpening the sword in his hand. Guy Mingyua broke through the air with her sword and suddenly reached Jilin's feet. She stabbed once, but it was as if she had stabbed hundreds of times. Sword Saint's self-created ultimate skill, 10,000 swords become one. She stabbed several times at an extremely fast speed and attacked one point as if she had only attacked once. Since one sword could not cut through his scales, then she would attack dozens of times, hundreds of times. Musin seemed to have the same idea. Countless punches rained down on Jilin's other foot. Flay prepared for a while and casually used the space slash. This was the only attack that had hurt Jilin in the intelligence reports. However, Jilin was no longer the same as before. Jilin had completely revealed his true strength and was now unrivaled. Even if 3 legendary masters attacked him together, it was still like an ant trying to shake a tree. Jilin looked at Guy Mingyua with interest and said, Your swordsmanship is really amazing. It just so happens that I have also obtained a new sword. Take a look. After saying that, a ball of flames rose beside Jilin's hand. Jilin's arm shook, and the flames dissipated. A huge sword appeared between heaven and earth. Cheers could be heard from afar. However, it was unknown if this thing could still be called a sword. It was too huge. When the Megalosaurus held it with one hand, it seemed to complement each other. Jilin raised the huge sword and slashed downwards. Even the Iron Blood King, who was very confident in his mobile city, was not sure if it could block this attack. Would it be slashed apart? The Iron Blood King could not help but have doubts. Sword Saint looked at the huge sword that was falling down like Mount Tai. The wind brought about by the huge sword made the Sword Saint's eyes hurt. Sword Saint thought to himself, this is not a sword. However, since the opponent had taken out a sword, he must also take out a sword in accordance with the etiquette of a swordsman. The sacred swordsman leaped onto Jilin's sword. Even if he knew that he would lose, even if he knew that he would die, he still had to take out his sword. This was the only way to live up to the name of a swordsman. This sword was called Sky-Piercing. Even Sword Saint felt that he would definitely lose, and perhaps even die. With such a mentality, this sword attack naturally had some tragic artistic conception in the eyes of others. Jiashu, who had been watching the battle, saw this sword attack and thought to himself, no wonder the opponent's title was Sword Saint, and the others' titles were Holy Wall, Red Dragon, and so on. Sure enough, there was something extraordinary about it. Knowing what is impossible and doing it, one is a saint. The Pope also saw it. He thought that even if there was a saying, there are things that a gentleman should and should not do, there was still a second line, wasn't there? There are things that a gentleman should and should not do. Knowing what can be done and doing it, knowing what cannot be done and not doing it, is the way of a gentleman's actions and not doing it. Even he, a person from the Simi Empire, knew this saying. What's wrong with you, a native of the Middle Empire? You're taking it out of context? Sword Saint's sword hit Jilin's sword. It was as if a mountain had crushed a green bamboo. The sword of light was broken. Sword Saint instantly fainted. Switch activated. Jiashu activated his divine skill, instantly switching positions with the Gai Mingyue, and raised his shield. The shield shattered. Thanks to the shield blocking the impact, Jiashu was knocked far away and escaped the fate of being split in half, but he was on the verge of death. In the blink of an eye, 2 legendary masters had died. The Pope was just about to raise his staff to heal the 2 of them. In front of the strongest human saint, such injuries were nothing. Jilin pointed his sword at the Pope. Just the sword energy caused countless small wounds to appear on the legendary master's body. Muzin came to the Pope's side and blocked the surging sword energy for him. The Emperor's body technique covered his body like metal. Jilin gently pushed the sword forward. The huge sword brushed past Muzin and accurately cut off his left arm. Jilin shook his head slightly. The stab was off target. It was his first time using a sword, and he was using a huge sword to stab ants. Even if it was Jilin, it was excusable for him to make a mistake occasionally. Muzin bled and fell to the ground, but he gritted his teeth and did not say a word. He just stared at Jilin with bloodshot eyes. The Pope's body was invaded by Jilin's sword energy, and his blood was in turmoil. He could not use magic at all. He thought that he had imagined how terrifying his opponent's abilities were, but he did not expect that he still underestimated him. This time, there were as many as 5 legendary champions who had come. Their preparations could not be said to be insufficient. The human's attitude towards this matter could not be said to be careless. However, they still achieved such an outcome. It was because Jilin's abilities were far beyond their imagination. Who would have thought that a Megalosaurus could take out a sword? Now, the Sword Saint's sword was broken, and his Emperor's body was crippled. The Holy Shield was broken, and the Pope was helpless. Only the weak sorcerer Flay was left to face the invincible Megalosaurus alone. There was nothing she could do. The Pope thought about how he had been so confident in front of Aisha. He had listened to Aisha's words, but he did not take them to heart. In the end, reality was really harsh. The Pope could not help but sigh. At this moment, the Pope put himself in the shoes of others. He thought of the legendary Marquis Prime Minister from the Middle Empire. How similar was his current situation to Marquis Prime Minister in his later years? Even if he was fully prepared and thought that he had anticipated all the variables, in the end, it was all so unreasonable and natural that he lost. Back then, Marquis Prime Minister waved his feather fan and schemed. He made his lifelong enemy fall into a raging fire. Just as the matter was about to be settled, it suddenly rained heavily, and his enemy escaped. At this moment, even this legendary figure could only sigh helplessly and say, "Man proposes, God disposes." The Pope also wanted to say this, or the equally famous sentence, "Why is the heavens so mean to me?" However, the bleeding all over his body was too painful. He really did not have the strength to do so. He could only spit out a mouthful of blood and give up. Actually, ordinary humans rarely cared about major matters. They rarely thought about the fate of humans. Firstly, it was because it was useless to think about it. To most humans, it was better to think about what to eat for dinner than to think about such matters. Secondly, humans had a saying, "When the sky falls, there is a tall one to hold it up." In the Middle Empire, this was called "the capable do more work." In the Simi Empire of the West, this was called "the greater the ability, the greater the responsibility." He didn't know if this principle made sense or if it was fair to the strong, but it did make life easier for most people. Just like the humans present, when the legendary powerhouses fought fiercely with Crimson Unicorn, they watched from the side with a clear conscience. No matter how concerned they appeared, it was still the same. Just because you're strong, you should face this calamitous creature and protect us, the weak. That's right, of course. However, when the situation took a turn and the legendary masters fell to the ground one after another, the humans were once again shrouded in despair. Yes, when the sky fell, there was a tall one to hold it up. However, if the tall one was smashed to death, what about the short one? Could you hold it up? Chapter 67. Of course, the answer was no. When the taller ones were smashed to death, the remaining ones could only feel despair. Escort His Majesty away first. The Duke roared when he saw this scene. The Duke drew his sword at the same time, wanting to charge towards Jilin. He wanted to use his life to buy some time for His Majesty to retreat. According to the script in the Duke's mind, this should have been a great sacrifice that would be recorded in history. Unfortunately, or perhaps fortunately, Beiluo hugged him tightly. The reason was simple. For out of the 5 legendaries here had already died. Even if Beiluo, who was not considered outstanding in the Diamond Realm, went up, he would only be a cup of water on a burning cart of firewood. He would only end up being evaporated in an instant. The Duke was stunned when he was suddenly hugged. He turned around and saw that it was Beiluo, who he had always thought was weak. Let go. Take His Majesty away first. Don't worry about me. The Duke did not dare to use force to push Beiluo away. After all, he did not know how strong Beiluo was. If he accidentally killed Beiluo, it would not be worth it. Thus, the Duke could only say this. The Duke felt that Beiluo would definitely let go of him after hearing his words. After all, between His Majesty and himself, who would Beiluo choose? This was not a problem at all. However, much to the Duke's surprise, Beiluo had no intention of letting go at all. The Duke was furious. He reached out to pull Beiluo's hands away. I didn't expect Beiluo to be so soft-hearted, the Duke thought to himself. The two of them were causing such a commotion behind the Iron Blood King. It was hard for him not to notice. The Iron Blood King frowned slightly. When did the two of them become so close? Calm down. Don't be impatient. The Iron Blood King raised his thick palm in front of the two of them and said calmly. The Duke looked at the steady palm in front of him and was stunned. He did not struggle anymore because he suddenly realized that the Iron Blood King's reaction was a little too calm. This was too strange. Even if His Majesty's realm was extraordinary and had seen through life and death, he should not have reacted this way because the Emperor's life did not belong to the Emperor himself. That was the Empire's greatest asset. If ordinary people died, then so be it. At most, their relatives and friends would change into white clothes to offer their condolences. It would not cause any significant and indelible impact on the surroundings. However, if the Emperor were to suddenly pass away, it would undoubtedly be a great blow to the Empire. Therefore, the Iron Blood King should not be so calm even if it was for the sake of the great country passed down by his ancestors. Moreover, in the Duke's eyes, the Iron Blood King was not someone who was used to putting himself in danger. This was not to say that the Iron Blood King was cautious, it was just the basic quality of an emperor. Since his every move was related to the lives of the world, he naturally had to be cautious. Since that was the case, there was only one possibility. His Majesty still had a backup plan. With that in mind, the Duke could not help but glance at the Pope, who was on the verge of collapsing, the unconscious Sword Saint Injiashu, and the crippled Emperor Physique. He thought to himself, Your Majesty, what other tricks do you have? Could he be more powerful than the legendary masters who had lost their combat power? If the Snow Wind Empire has such a background, then why didn't you say something earlier? Wouldn't it be better if I led the troops to help you take down the Middle Empire? Haven't you been curious about the secrets of the Middle Empire for a long time? Why do you still have to scheme against Bello and the Empire when you have so many troops in your hands? Why must the people of my snow-wind empire suffer the pain of the cold and the cold alone in this world? Your Majesty, it's time. Bello raised his head from behind the Duke. Yes. The Iron Blood King nodded lightly. Then, he stretched out his hand to push aside the soldiers in front of him and slowly walked forward. The soldiers were so frightened by the Iron Blood King's actions that they felt as if their hearts were about to jump out of their stomachs. The soldiers wanted to stop him and pull the Emperor back, but the soldiers who were close to him were all intimidated by the calm expression on the Iron Blood King's face. Their raised hands froze in mid-air, and they did not dare to act rashly. The Iron Blood King's footsteps were slow, but very steady. He could not be stopped, so he walked to the front of the human soldiers. Facing the red disaster, there was nothing in the middle. This was the aura of an emperor. Without making a sound, without making a move, he could intimidate the world's warriors and make countless heroes bow down. The Iron Blood King raised his head to look at Jilin and waved his hand. Jilin also looked at him curiously. He didn't know what was so special about this human. He didn't know or couldn't understand the significance of the word emperor to humans. However, he could see the uniqueness of this human with a single glance. With the wave of the Iron Blood King's hand, on the battlefield, there were two people carrying a thick wooden box. They seriously and respectfully placed the wooden box behind the Iron Blood King, as if they were not carrying a wooden box, but an incomparably noble throne. The Iron Blood King took the long sword from his waist. Without looking back, he raised the cloak behind him. With a whoosh, the cloak was raised high. The Iron Blood King took the opportunity to sit down. At the same time, the cloak also fell down, covering the Iron Blood King's back once again. There was even a part of the cloak on the ground. The Iron Blood King held the long sword with both hands. He sat upright on the wooden box with his chest puffed out and his stomach tucked in. His majestic aura swept through the wilderness. Jilin narrowed his eyes. What kind of trick is this human playing? It was as if two parties were having an academic debate, and one of them suddenly walked over and slapped the other. This was called playing cards that did not follow common sense. In such a situation, no matter who it was, they would have to think carefully about it. The Pope's entire body was covered in wounds, and he was swaying unsteadily. Even so, he couldn't help but think that as the Pope of the Church, he was still lacking in some aspects compared to the Emperor of the Empire. Even if he was given another 10 years, he still wouldn't be able to match up to the Emperor of the Empire. The Pope could not help but shake his head and smile bitterly. However, such a small movement caused him to lose the balance he had worked so hard to maintain. He could not hold on any longer and fell backwards. Just as the Pope was about to fall to the ground, a pair of hands reached out from behind him and supported him firmly. "Your Holiness has worked hard," Lord said in a low voice. The Pope turned around and saw Lord's old face and the rest of the Church of Light. The Pope looked at the concerned gazes of Lord and the others and smiled slightly. He shook his head and said, "It's fine. Iron Blood King, I'm not that much worse than you. How's the divine weapon?" the Pope asked. "Fortunately, it did not fail," Lord said. "That, cough, is good. What are you waiting for? Hurry up and treat the legends." "Your Holiness, I will do it myself," Lord said. Only then did the members of the Church of Light begin to move. The Pope smiled at Lord and pointed at the Iron Blood King with a trembling finger. "Look at this man. For the sake of showing off, cough, cough, he would even throw away his life, cough, cough." Lord looked at the majestic Iron Blood King and Jilin, who was staring at him. He felt that the Pope's words made sense, but years of habit did not allow him to express his agreement. He only pressed the Pope's hand gently and said, "Your Holiness, there is no need to say anything else. Besides, I don't think there is anything in this city that can hurt the Iron Blood King at all." "Is that so?" "If that is the case, then that is good," the Pope said softly with a heavy gaze. "But don't forget, the Iron Blood King never thought of winning this battle." Lord frowned. He was originally full of confidence in the divine weapon, but for some reason, after hearing the Pope's words, a trace of worry crept into his heart. Lord shook his head fiercely and chased the negative emotions out of his mind. Impossible. This time, we are fully prepared. There is no reason for us to fail. The Pope was stunned by Lord's words. He looked at Lord's aged face and thought of the Lord who used to follow him around when they were children. After so many years, he realized that this was the first time he felt that this kid was so similar to himself in certain aspects. I was thinking the same thing before, but I didn't say it. If I said it in public, I'm afraid I'd have the heart to find a hole to hide in. It seems that Lord is still too inexperienced. Human, I can tell that you are different, which is why I allowed you to live so long. But what is the meaning of this? Do you want to die? Jilin stared at the Iron Blood King. His large golden eyes clearly reflected the Iron Blood King's figure. The Iron Blood King smiled and said, "Humans have no manners, so why not die?" Jilin pressed his face even closer. The wind from his breath was enough to mess up the Iron Blood King's neat cloak. Humans have no manners, so why not die? This sentence is quite interesting. If humans don't have manners, then what is the point of dying? Is that what you mean? Jilin asked. The Iron Blood King thought for a moment and said, "Something like that. Humans really are creatures that look down on life. Anything can weigh more than life." Jilin couldn't help but sigh. The Iron Blood King shook his head seriously and said, "Human life is greater than heaven." When Jilin heard this, his tail froze. A moment later, an earth-shattering laughter rang through the clouds, causing the Iron Blood King's eardrums to hurt. Ha ha ha. Ha ha ha. Human life is greater than heaven? How arrogant. You humans are so insignificant as a speck of dust in this world. Yet you always say things like humans can conquer the heavens. Frogs at the bottom of a well, looking at the sky from the bottom of a well. Do you know how high the heavens are? Do you know how high, how wide, and how thick the heavens are? No, you don't know, because you can't even fly. Truly, the ignorant are fearless. You're just making people laugh, Jilin said. Hearing Jilin's words, the Pope thought, this dragon idiom is really good. I wonder who taught him. Chapter 68. Hearing Jilin's words, Iron Blood King wanted to say something but hesitated. His thick lips opened slightly and then closed again. But in the end, he still said with great determination, humans have unlimited possibilities, because they dare to think, dare to do. We have no advantage compared to other races. In this world of ice and snow, we don't have fur to protect ourselves from the cold. We also don't have enough to obtain food with sharp teeth and claws. But humans still became the master of this world of ice and snow. We rely on our unconstrained wisdom and the belief that humans can conquer the heavens, unyielding will. We, the Snow Wind Empire, don't pray to the gods and don't fear this vile world. We believe that we can get what we want through our hands. Even if there isn't originally, we can create it ourselves. An environment suitable for humans to live only exists in the mythical heaven where everyone can live peacefully. So, there was nothing that could stop the humans. Even if it's heaven and earth. Even if it's God. You are fine too. Don't say anything more. Iron Blood King said intermittently. These words should have made the people who were speaking or listening extremely anxious, but everyone listened very seriously. They were attracted by every word Iron Blood King said and were moved by every word he said. Because this was what an emperor said to a god-like Megalosaurus. The emperor sat on the wooden box, not even as high as the Megalosaurus's feet. The Megalosaurus only needed to raise its hands slightly to end his life. But the emperor maintained his majesty. When he spoke, his eyes seemed to contain endless light. His voice was steady and powerful. In everyone's eyes, the Emperor's aura was enough to be on par with the Megalosaurus. They were equal. Only the Pope and Lord instinctively frowned when they heard Iron Blood King say, "Don't pray to the gods." Jilin was infuriated. His golden pupils shone brightly, and he bent his ferocious dragon claws. The scales on his fingers all stood up, and the edges of the scales were shining with a cold light, incomparably sharp. There were also countless small flames shooting out from between Jilin's teeth. All the humans who could move could not help but take a few steps back. It was because he was curious to hear what this special human had to say that he was patient enough to not kill him. He had to wait for this person with a speech impediment to finish his sentence. How great was this treatment? In human terms, it was not an exaggeration to say that he was looking at her in a new light. When he first met Aisha, he had poked a hole in her head with his finger before she could even finish her first sentence. This time, he allowed a human to spout such nonsense in front of him and even provoked him in the end? There had never been a human who dared to provoke him when he was in such a state. Jilin suddenly opened his mouth and spat out a huge flame at Iron Blood King. It was not a dragon's breath, but a small flame unconsciously produced by Jilin when he was extremely angry. If Jilin's action was taken by a human, it would probably be equivalent to shouting at someone who angered you. But even if it was just a casual action, those flames still came from Jilin's mouth. They were flames cast by the most powerful creature in this world, the divine Megalosaurus of the fire attribute. Its heat was enough to instantly melt any material that the dwarves were proud of. Of course, it could also melt a person's armor and body. "Your Majesty!" The Duke roared. He raised his hand in the direction of Iron Blood King, trying to grab something in vain. His expression was ferocious, and there was a trace of the deepest despair hidden in his eyes. The Iron Blood King was enveloped in flames, and the surface of the moving city around him began to melt. The hard black stone turned into a rippling liquid, and the flames only lasted for 2 or 3 seconds. The ground that had already turned into liquid started to solidify under the extremely low temperature, becoming hard once again. But this time, it was no longer flat, and it no longer had simple patterns. It had countless wrinkles, like the surface of the sea that had been instantly frozen by a breeze. Only a very small area did not change, and that was the ground under the Iron Blood King's feet. It was as flat as before, and from a distance, it looked like a small island in a lake. The Iron Blood King was still sitting on his throne, and that wooden box was also undamaged. No one knew what had happened, and no one knew how the Iron Blood King had managed to survive under such hot flames. But everyone knew that this was not something the Iron Blood King could have done with his own strength. This was the power of the Snow Wind Empire's Emperor. The Iron Blood King still stuck the sword in the ground, and did not have any intention of pulling it out. Moreover, from the moment the Iron Blood King stuck it in the ground, it did not move at all. The Iron Blood King seemed to want to use his actions to prove what was meant by the important weapon of a country cannot be used without permission. An emperor should be like this. An emperor's personal strength was the most useless thing besides strengthening his body. Because he had a country, he could do everything for him. An emperor's sword naturally had very little practical use, and was more of a symbolic meaning. For example, seeing a sword was like seeing a person or something. If an emperor had no choice but to pull out his sword, if it was not an accident, it could only mean that the country was at the end of its rope. At that time, even if the emperor could use his sword to kill his enemies, it would be better for him to directly cut his own throat. The Duke looked at the safe and sound His Majesty, still in a state of shock. He swallowed a mouthful of saliva, and only then did he breathe a sigh of relief. Although it was a basic requirement for an outstanding general to remain unfazed even if MT Tai collapsed in front of them, but to the Duke, if the Iron Blood King died, it would not be comparable to a mountain collapsing, it would be like the sky collapsing. The Duke pulled Beiluo over and roared into his ears, "What is going on?" Beiluo was shocked. He could not help but push the Duke away. However, the Duke did not move at all, and his hand was still tightly holding onto Beiluo's sleeve. Beiluo knew that the Duke was using all his strength to hold onto him, and he would not be able to break free. "Beiluo, who had quickly judged the situation before him, immediately gave up on the idea of pushing the Duke away. He could only use his other hand to rub his ear that was hurting from the shock. He said to the Duke with a slight smile, "What is so hard to understand? As the monarch of a country, just going into battle in person is enough to make us, his subjects, feel ashamed. If we don't make full preparations, don't tell me you want His Majesty to fight the enemy with your sword." Hearing this, the Duke gritted his teeth, and the hand holding onto Beluo's sleeve became even more forceful, and his veins were exposed. "Then why didn't you tell me earlier? Why did you make me so worried and embarrassed?" the Duke said with a hoarse voice. Facing the Duke's sinister expression, Beluo did not feel the slightest bit of fear. He lowered his head and tried to pry off the Duke's pinky finger. At the same time, he said with a chuckle, "Your Excellency must be joking. How could you belittle yourself like this? How is this a disgraceful act? In this humble one's humble opinion, you are clearly a loyal and patriotic person, a brave and righteous person. You are simply a role model for all the soldiers. After this battle, Your Excellency's reputation in the military camp is bound to rise to another level. This humble one will congratulate you in advance." When the Duke heard Beluo's flattering words, his mood did not improve in the slightest. Instead, he sneered again and again, saying with a sneer, "Rise to another level? And then face even more fierce attacks from the civil officials under Grand Secretary Bello?" The Duke seemed to have thought of all the insults he had received from the civil officials in the royal court these past few years, and he became even angrier. Grand Secretary Bello did not feel the slightest bit of guilt. He said with a mischievous smile, "This humble one was forced to do this. Moreover, Your Excellency should be well aware of this as well. How can a general's strength not be restricted? I hope Your Excellency can understand." "Understand? Your methods are always so despicable. How can I understand? Then what do you think we should do?" "You can't expect us scholars to fight openly with you military generals, can you? That would be too stupid." "Ah. Ouch, ouch, hurry up and let go of me. I won't talk about the past now. Don't talk about other things with me. I just want to ask you one thing. Why did I, as the commander-in-chief, not know about this kind of backup plan?" "That's simple," Bello said with a smile. "Speak." When the Red Disaster first appeared in Morag, when it first appeared in the eyes of the Empire, regardless of the circumstances, it was Your Excellency who led the way. The Duke suddenly let go of Bello's hand. Even with his strength as a diamond expert, he actually staggered back a step. He was flabbergasted. "His Majesty, he doesn't trust me?" The Duke stuttered in disbelief. Bello looked at the Duke with some sympathy. He thought to himself that this kind of expression would never end. In fact, the Duke could already be said to be very trusted by His Majesty. But there was no other way. The Iron Blood King would not completely trust anyone because of the position of Emperor. That's right, anyone. After Jilin spat out a mouthful of flames, he suddenly looked up. He saw a white light abruptly appear beside the sun, which was rarely seen in the Snow Wind Empire. It seemed to be side by side with the scorching sun. But Jilin clearly knew that was not the case. It was only an illusion. That light seemed to be slowly descending but was actually very fast. In a short while, it floated in front of the Iron Blood King. The light receded, and a pure white fortress appeared in front of Jilin's eyes. The light receded, as if there was endless energy hidden within. This is the document, the legend, the weapon that humans once used to defeat the gods. What do you think? The Iron Blood King held his sword and said to Jilin in a deep voice. He was full of confidence and high spirits. Chapter 69. What do I think? Jilin thought to himself, I seem to have dismantled one of these things a while ago. It looks very cool, but it's actually very fragile. Jilin shook his head and said, I don't think so. Hearing this, the Iron Blood King did not argue and said with a faint smile, then, let's give it a try." After the Iron Blood King said this, the Ming Shui divine weapon began to shine. 3 halos formed by countless sacred characters appeared behind him, and 6 straight wings of light extended from his back. His right hand turned into a rapid-fire cannon that was many times larger than the normal model, and his left hand turned into a white sword of light. Bright Snow God Armament, battle mode activated. The sound of machinery operating could be heard as the Bright Snow God Armament raised its hand and shot out 3 consecutive shots. White energy bullets whistled through the air. Although the energy bullets released by the Bright Snow God Armament were very aggressive and shocking, all the humans who had seen Jilin's strength did not have much hope. After all, before, even the Sword Saint's heaven-splitting sword and the Emperor's cloud-scattering fist were not effective, let alone the energy bullets that could be seen everywhere in the Snow Wind Empire. Although the energy bullets fired by the Bright Snow God Armament were indeed much larger than normal energy bullets, only the Pope looked on expectantly. He originally thought that the Red Disaster would take the hit without moving. After all, Jilin did indeed have the strength to do so, and also had such an arrogant attitude. But in the end, things did not go as planned. Jilin stared at the 3 white energy bullets, and a bad feeling suddenly emerged in his heart. His golden eyes slightly narrowed, as if he was facing a great enemy. Jilin covered his body with his wings. The small scales on his wings were tightly closed and the soft wings suddenly became hard. These were 2 solid shields that were as stable as Mount Tai. Boom! 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 The 3 energy bullets hit Jilin's wings one after another, causing smoke and dust to fly out and cover Jilin's huge body. After a moment, a golden light shot out through the smoke. Jilin roared and suddenly spread his wings. A dragon-like hurricane swept out and instantly blew away all the smoke. The world became clear again. The Pope looked at Jilin, who appeared from the smoke, and his eyes seemed a bit dim. He lightly sighed and shook his head. "Sigh, what a pity. Yeah, it's really troublesome." Lord replied. Jilin held the huge sword with both hands and pointed it behind him. His entire dragon body leaned forward and his dragon shoulders slightly lowered. His wings were raised high, ready to attack. This posture allowed one to hide the tip of the sword behind one's back. Regardless of whether it was an upward slash or a downward slash, it was very convenient, making it impossible for the enemy to judge the trajectory of the sword. This seems like a sword technique? The Duke turned to look at Bellows with a bit of doubt muttered. Bellows, like he was a completely different person, to laugh. His brows were tightly knitted, and his expression was extremely solemn. She ignored him completely. Jilin's wings flapped and he instantly turned into a streak of red light, disappearing on the spot. Even though he was holding such a huge sword, it did not seem to affect his speed in the slightest. In just a moment, Jilin had closed in on the enemy and completed an upward slash in the meantime. The Bright Snow Divine Weapon's automatic defense system activated. The Sacred God Sword of Light shone brightly in front of his chest. The 2 swords clashed. Boom! The 2 swords had clearly clashed, but who would have thought that the collision would produce an explosive sound? The violent sound traveled down to the ground, enough to make people's ears temporarily lose their function. However, they did not cover their ears at all. They just looked up at the sky in a daze. Everyone's face seemed to be blooming with a faint radiance. That was hope. That was the feeling of seeing the light at the end of the tunnel after the mountains and rivers, and seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. Because Jilin's sword had actually been blocked. This was the first time a human had blocked the Red Disaster. When Jilin's sword clashed with the Sword of Light, Jilin felt as if he was being suppressed by something, unable to display his full strength. This feeling was honestly somewhat familiar, just like when the Great White Formation had descended in Sacred City. It was to the extent that he could not destroy this human toy in front of him. Interesting. Jilin thought to himself. While Jilin was in a daze, the Bright Snow Divine Weapon had already raised the rapid-fire cannon in its right hand and aimed it at Jilin's face. It immediately began to fire without any hesitation. Jilin was startled by the cannon in front of his eyes. However, the dragon race's reaction speed was indescribably fast compared to humans. Under Jilin's high concentration, his golden vertical pupils could clearly see that the rapid-fire cannon was firing. The cannon's barrel glowed bit by bit as the cannon shell slowly left the chamber. Since he could see it clearly, he could naturally dodge it and defend against it. Jilin's long neck shifted to the side and dodged the first few cannon shells. Soon after, he began to exert strength with his hands and swung the bright snow divine weapon away. The bright snow divine weapon was repelled. However, it did not waver in the slightest. It continued to madly fire at Jilin. The rapid-fire cannon shells formed a white line in the sky, without stopping. Seeing this, Jilin changed to holding his sword with one hand. He raised his left hand and stood sideways. He stuck out his chest and raised his head. At the same time, he spread his 5 fingers. Looking at this posture. Could it be? Grand Secretary Bellow's throat was somewhat dry. He couldn't help but swallow a mouthful of saliva. He already had some extremely bad guesses. However, it was rare for him to not dare to believe his own judgment. Thus, he asked Fry, who had unknowingly arrived near them to watch the show. When Fry heard Bellow's words and saw Jilin's posture, even as a legend rank expert, she couldn't help but shiver. With great difficulty, she said, "That's right. I want to release a magic spell. Furthermore, this is my signature move." When releasing the fireball technique, countless fire elements were scrambling to listen to Jilin's command. An unimaginable amount of fire elements gathered in front of Jilin's left hand. They were arranging themselves in an interesting manner. An enormous fireball appeared in front of Jilin. It illuminated half of the sky and devoured countless energy bullets. Before this fireball, Jilin's enormous body couldn't help but appear small. The Duke extended his hand to cover his eyes. That firelight was truly too dazzling. Although they were very far away, the Duke was still able to clearly feel the roasting heat. To a person from the Snow-Wind Empire, this was a rare experience. It was unimaginable how high the temperature of that fireball was. Also, how high was the temperature in the center of that fireball? Is this a fireball technique? Bellow's voice became sharp. He looked at Fry in disbelief. In essence, yes. However, in terms of effect, it's more like the legendary fire element magic. Setting Sunday. Fry looked at that fireball and slightly narrowed her eyes. She continued to stare at it. Even though she was stung by the firelight and couldn't help but shed tears, she still didn't blink. The emotion that was revealed from her narrowed eyes was yearning. However, after looking at it for a while, Fry lowered her head in the end. Even though she was known as the fire dragon among the humans, even though she was the strongest user of fire element magic, she still believed that this was a realm that she would never be able to reach. At this moment, Fry truly understood what it meant to look up to a tall mountain. Although you can't reach it, your heart yearns for it. Although she was the mountain in the eyes of others in the past. Jilin pushed his left hand forward slightly. The enormous fireball flew toward the bright snow god armament. The raging fireball crushed forward with an aura that could topple mountains and overturn seas. Although it wasn't very fast, it had a wide range. Moreover, the bright snow god armament was too close to Jilin. It was impossible for it to dodge. Seeing that the bright snow god armament was about to be engulfed by the fireball, the Iron Blood King and the Pope finally looked at each other. The two of them slowly nodded. The Pope took out the cross of the God of Light that he always wore around his neck. He held the pendant in front of his chest with both hands. After a short while, a dazzling light seeped out from between the Pope's fingers. The Iron Blood King also picked up the sword for the first time. His finger lightly brushed across the sword's edge. A drop of blood started to flow on the sword. The blue gem on the sword's hilt started to turn blood red. At the same time, the bright snow god armament's eyes also changed from blue to red. The two straight wings on its back suddenly extended. The wings of light became even larger. Compared to the bright snow god armament's body, it was too exaggerated and uncoordinated. Bright Snow God Armament, God Slaying Mode, activate. The Iron Blood King couldn't help but frown. He felt helpless toward the person who designed this method of unlocking the Bright Snow God Armament. Why did they have to scratch him? Couldn't they learn from the Church of Light? Why did they want His Majesty to constantly remind him that there must be a price to pay for using too much power? In the Iron Blood King's opinion, this was simply that person's bad taste. Or perhaps that person had been unhappy with him for a long time. Now that there was a chance to make him suffer a little, he wouldn't let go of such a rare opportunity. The Bright Snow God Armament that had activated the God-slaying mode was a level stronger than before in every aspect. With a click, the rapid-fire cannon on the Bright Snow God Armament's right hand actually fell off. Another sword of light shot out from the original socket. The Bright Snow God Armament raised its left hand high and chopped down. A visible dent appeared on the huge fireball. Although this dent was insignificant compared to the entire fireball. However, there was a saying that went, "A 1,000-mile dike collapses because of an ant's hole." The Bright Snow God Armament began to continuously wave the two swords in its hands. The dent began to deepen and expand. Slowly, the huge fireball was forcibly split in half by the Bright Snow God Armament. The Bright Snow God Armament passed through the two halves of the fireball and stood in front of Jilin. A few wisps of green smoke floated from its body. The huge and holy wings of light spread out behind it. If it weren't for its blood-red eyes, it really would have looked like an angel from the heavenly realm. However, the green smoke was caused by the extremely high temperature of the fireball. Jilin looked at the extremely beautiful Bright Snow God Armament and stuck out his tongue to lick his sharp fangs. He thought to himself, how interesting. Chapter 70. A toy made by a weak human could actually remain unscathed under the fireball released by the divine Megalosaurus. Only a few wisps of green smoke appeared on the surface of the fire. For the divine Megalosaurus, this was of course very interesting. It was as interesting as a human seeing their own cat beat up someone else's dog. It was just a small accident that had nothing to do with it and was happy to see. The Bright Snow God Soldier in its Godslayer mode had enormous wings. With a seemingly light flap, its entire body shot out like a meteor. The high-speed friction with the air caused the Bright Snow God Soldier's entire body to ignite with raging flames. Jilin shook his head slightly when he saw this. Sure enough, the things made by humans still lacked souls. For it to spontaneously combust because of its own speed, this meant that the Bright Snow God Soldier did not have any connection with the elements of heaven and earth. It was like a strong man who had brute force but did not know how to use it. The way it used its own strength was so crude and unsightly. On the other hand, the dragon race was much faster than the Bright Snow God Soldier at their fastest speed. Why didn't they spontaneously combust while flying? It was nothing more than knowing how and why. The dragon race had a more thorough understanding of the nature of heaven and earth. Weak humans. They were a little too reliant on power outside of themselves. But they had only reached great heights with the help of external forces. Even if they could be in the limelight for a while, they still could not escape the miserable fate of collapsing buildings. From Jilin's point of view, this was the wrong path. Dragons could not understand why humans did not put their energy into improving themselves but kept studying these useless things. The most important thing was that even if humans could gain more power and stand at a higher level through studying these things, they would not be able to do so. But this kind of thing, even if it was high, how high could it be? No matter how high they stood, what meaning did it have to humans? The Bright Snow God Soldier came in front of Jilin with flames all over its body. It crossed its two swords and slashed forward. Jilin pushed the huge sword in his hand forward and accurately pointed at the point where the two swords crossed. The Bright Snow God Soldier's two swords could not move forward. The Iron Blood King, who had been calm all this time, finally changed his expression. His eyes widened and his face was as gloomy as water. He gripped the long sword in his hand tightly. The knight's gauntlet attached to the iron armor rubbed against the hilt of the sword. How could this be? Wasn't the Godslayer mode activated? Didn't they say that the bright snow god soldier in Godslayer mode could be suppressed even by gods? How could this be? How could it still be so easily beaten by the enemy without any ability to fight back? The Iron Blood King. The Iron. Qilin didn't think so. He felt that the strength of the toy in front of him was indeed much greater than before. It's almost as big as one of my hands. Humans really can't be underestimated. Of the bright snow god. The bright. In its simple operation instructions, there was only one judgment. Since this plan didn't work, then change to another one. The bright snow deity soldier, who had been blocked, took a small step back and pulled some distance away from Qilin. The two swords that had been suppressed regained their freedom. The bright snow deity soldier immediately moved forward again and began to brandish the two swords in his hands like a storm. There was no technique to speak of, and all he wanted was to be fast. There were only two swords, but the bright snow god soldier waved them like a mighty army. It was like the wind sweeping away the clouds and the waves hitting the shore. It was continuous and powerful. Countless sword shadows shrouded Qilin from all directions. The white light swords seemed to have weaved into a huge birdcage, attacking the enemy. There was no way for him to escape. The birdcage seemed to be able to crush all living things into pieces. That was how it should be, but the problem was that Qilin was not a bird. He was a dragon. A cage used to keep birds actually wanted to lock up a dragon. In that case, it could only end up with its body smashed to pieces. Qilin raised the huge sword and put it into the bright snow god soldier's sword circle. He only flipped his wrist up and down. His body did not move at all. The huge sword flew up and down in the sword circle like a swimming dragon. Countless sword shadows were immediately repelled the moment they touched the huge sword. However, from the looks of it, Qilin did not use much strength at all. The cumbersome huge sword allowed Qilin to use the effect of 4 ounces to move 1,000 pounds. The area covered by the light swords could not be reduced any further. At this moment, Qilin gave off the feeling of a lonely mountain standing in the sea in a storm. I will not move, and let the wind come from all directions. It's really too abnormal. A weak voice sighed with a strong sense of bitterness. Although this voice was weak and somewhat inaudible, it still attracted the attention of everyone present. This was because the owner of this voice was the Sword Saint, Guy Mingyue, who had just woken up. Musin looked at the Sword Saint strangely. He thought to himself, we are already lying on the ground. Do I need you to tell me that the red calamity is abnormal? If it was an ordinary person who could not help but exclaim in shock, it would be understandable. However, what kind of person is the Guy Mingyue? Isn't this a little embarrassing for us legendary powerhouses? What kind of person was the Emperor of Physique, Musin? Ever since he was young, he had been traveling around the continent. Usually, he would fight if there was something wrong with his gaze. He would only use his hands to do things. He would not use his brain if he could. He always believed that there was nothing that he could not solve with his iron fists. In short, he was a standard person. He was straightforward to the end. This kind of person would not know how to hide his expression at all. As a result, the Guy Mingyue only needed to look at Musin's face to understand the meaning behind his expression. After all, both of them were close combat characters among the legendary powerhouses. They would occasionally exchange pointers with each other. After exchanging blows back and forth for no less than 70 to 80 times, they were already very familiar with each other. Sword Saint thought to himself, he's obviously quite strong, so why doesn't he use his brain to think? How did this person survive in the deceitful human society? To be able to enter the realm of the legendary realm was truly a miracle. Sword Saint could not help but criticize in his heart. However, Musin did not have the ability to understand the meaning behind the words like Sword Saint. He just continued to stare at the Sword Saint. I'm not talking about his strength, the Sword Saint explained helplessly. I'm talking about his terrifying learning ability and the speed of his growth. The Sword Saint raised his head and looked at Qilin, who was in the sky. He looked at the sword in Jilin's hand and sighed with disappointment. Look, his swordsmanship has obviously reached the level where he can wield it like an extension of his arm. He and his sword have become one. This might not be accurate, but it's roughly what I mean. In short, his swordsmanship has reached a higher level. Do you know what this means? Muzin shook his head. Although people who were at the same level of mastery would end up in the same place. However, the saying a difference in profession is like a difference in mountains was not just a saying. When I was young, I used to travel the world with a sword. Although the time I spent on the continent was not as long as yours, I've experienced many ups and downs. I've seen many people and things, so I'm not considered ignorant. But to be honest, among the countless people I've met, I've never found anyone who's more talented in the way of the sword than me, Guy Mingyue said in an extremely sincere and indifferent manner. She spoke such arrogant words. If it had been anyone else who had said those words, the audience would have had expressions of annoyance, ridicule, or contempt. Perhaps there would have been some who would have drawn their swords on the spot, wanting to fight it out with the person who had spoken. However, this was the sword saint, the Guy Mingyue's words. Hence, there was no such thing. Everyone waited for the sword saint to continue. No one had any other expression. Because this was just a plain fact that did not contain any rhetorical devices. A sword saint should say such words. If the sword saint said that his talent was average, his swordsmanship was mediocre, and so on, it would be hypocritical if it wasn't to disgust others. However, even for me, from the first time I touched a sword to the moment I became one with the sword, it took me 2 years. As for him. The sword saint paused and looked away from Jilin. He looked at Muzin's broken arm and said faintly, not long ago, it was obvious that he had just touched a sword and did not know how to use it. He even missed when he tried to stab you. However, now, he can easily stab a small spot that moves so quickly. Muzin knew that the sword saint was talking about the spot where Ming Shue's 2 swords crossed. This kind of terrifying improvement in learning speed is really terrifying and helpless. The sword saint closed his eyes and sighed. That's right. It was obvious that he learned the fireball technique after seeing me use it once. In the end, he really made me feel ashamed. That fireball technique is really something that I cannot compare to. Flay clenched her fist tightly and expressed her unwillingness to admit defeat. However, there's something that I don't understand. It's understandable for him to learn Mingyu's swordsmanship. After all, he seems to like his sword a lot. However, why did he learn my fire magic? You must know that he is a fire dragon. Flay was puzzled. That's because he wants to understand humans. The Pope spoke. He uses a human's appearance, acts like a human, learns a human's language, learns a human's swordsmanship and learns a human's magic. However, there is no need for him to do all of that. Yet, he still did it. There is only one explanation for that. He wants to understand humans. That's why he deliberately learned those things. That's why it's so sudden. The Pope smiled. It was as if he had discovered a little secret that no one knew about. How did you discover it? The Iron Blood King frowned and asked in a deep voice. Could it be? Didn't you all feel that his idiom was too good for a dragon? The Pope raised his hand and scratched his forehead. He asked in astonishment. You're tuning into the Mythic Realms YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.